Hello, puppies and kittens. Welcome to another episode of Blasphemers Bible. I have puppy pandemonium going on behind me. Nothing that can be done about that. So we're moving. We finally got out of the Pentateuch. We're now into Joshua 1, some of the rest of the Bible. And it's an interesting thing. I just found out yesterday. Did you know that the entire Christian religion was created by a Roman?
Yeah, that was that. I swear, I was livid. And then his message to you that you forwarded was concerning, like, oh, maybe this in so many words, it was, oh, they should look into this other theological framework. I'm like, I don't have like a theological presupposition here. I am going purely based off of the actual sources and historians. And I think that he thinks that because I do, biblical studies, that I am automatically some Christian with a specific theological agenda, and that, oh my God, awful.
The Bible makes so much more sense when you don't have that. So much more sense.
Yeah, makes a lot more sense.
You don't have to do the mental yoga where it's like you feel like you're sticking your head up your own ass and your foot behind your ear to try and pretend a thing doesn't say what it obviously says.
Hey, I did that yesterday.
Yeah, well, whatever floats your boat.
Okay, so
you
what
must be
happened
one of
to
those liberal scholars, Lawrence, that are guided by Satan.
Of course, right.
Ah. Is Satan another word for facts?
Do we have any more opening commentary, or should we dive into it?
I have an entire presentation, Arn.
Let's hear it.
All right, sounds good. Let me just pull up a few things here. Perfect. All right. So we're starting today is called the Deuteronomistic history. So I wanted to discuss it because it has a very long history of scholarship, and there are a lot of questions surrounding it. There are a lot of things to account for, and I kind of want to talk about some of the general models that scholars have proposed. So, the Deuteronomistic history. What is it, and how is it compiled? So we can go to slide 2. So generally speaking, it's the work spanning from Joshua through 2 Kings, excluding Ruth. However, parts of Deuteronomy are also included in this. We can link these texts as one narrative based on a few factors, including similar words and phrases like until this day and at that time. There are a few other ones as well, combined with its similar ideologies concerning the nature of kingship, God's vengeance, and a whole bunch more. Traditionally, these books are assigned to different authors that can be identified with biblical characters. So last week when we covered the death of Moses, we covered how Joshua is generally thought to have written the section where Moses dies, while Moses wrote the rest of it. Joshua, being the first book of the Deuteronomistic history proper that we're starting today, has been seen as being written by Joshua himself. Judges was thought to be written by Samuel, along with 1 Samuel. 2 Samuel was thought to be written by Gad and Nathan, according to an interpretation of 1 Chronicles 29:29. Now the acts of King David, from first to last, are written in the record of the seer Samuel, and in all the records of the prophet Nathan, and in the records of the seer Gad, although sometimes it was thought to have been written by David himself. And then 1st and 2nd Kings were thought to be written by Jeremiah. So we can move on to slide 3. So one of the initial hints that led scholars to conclude otherwise was the repeated inclusion of the phrase until this day. The reason it's significant is because it assumes that a long amount of time had passed. Today, we generally use it kind of hyperbolically, but in ancient literature, this just wasn't the case. Over time, there have been a few different proposals. Usually this was waved away by early rabbis as meaning forever, or that the doctrine, structure, or whatever they're referring to would stand forever. In the Jewish tradition, this was generally the case until Abravanel in the 15th century raised questions about it. He pointed out the usage of the phrase implies that it was a long time, or that it was written a long time after. He even goes so far as to say that Joshua doesn't even say it was written by Joshua. So why would he think that he wrote it? Instead, he actually thought that Joshua was written by Samuel. He stood with other rabbis in believing that Judges was written by Samuel as well. But even he points out the problems with a view based on that when he cites the fact that Judges 18:30 says that then the Danites set up the idol for themselves. Jonathan, son of Gershom, son of Moses, and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the time the land went into captivity. So that reference right there, until the time that the land went into captivity, the earliest time that could possibly be written was during the Assyrian invasion. So that's in like the 8th century. So we can move on to slide 4. So in Christian traditions, this phrase had a slightly different understanding. There was a common belief that the Torah was actually destroyed and had to be rewritten by Ezra. So the inclusion of "until this day" was explained by Ezra's additions to the text. So this position was held by Jerome and Andreas Macias. Augustine, on the other hand, agreed with the traditional Jewish interpretation, meaning forever. Both Luther and Calvin believed that the phrase denoted the time of the author, so they would have had different meaning depending on the book. But Calvin would have placed it later because he believed Eliezer compiled the books and also composed Joshua, weirdly enough. John Wesley actually believed that these were inserted passages by holy men, essentially inserted by pious scribes. So we can go to the next slide. So here are some more secular views, right? So critical scholarship, or I guess a more secular study of the text on this, actually began with Thomas Hobbes, and he actually started pointing out the issues in secular circles with until this day. Some of the thinkers at the time, like Isaac Le Pereire, I think. I probably am mispronouncing that. I don't know. He believed that Deuteronomy was written during the time of David, basing his reading on Deuteronomy 2:22. Spinoza even chimed in, believing that the entire Deuteronomistic history was written by one later author, but modern critical methods were soon to be applied. So we can go to the next slide. So the dawn of critical scholarship. In the 19th century, we see the groundbreaking work of Wilhelm de Witt. His work was actually a precursor to Wellhausen's documentary hypothesis, otherwise known as JEDP. A lot of people like to think of Wellhausen as like the father of modern biblical scholarship, but it was actually this guy. He was the first modern scholar to link the scroll found in Josiah's time to the text of Deuteronomy. He does it in a footnote, by the way. Although Voltaire seems to have made this observation earlier, uh, his model was incomplete, though, when it came to the Deuteronomistic history. References to "until this day" referred to a whole bunch of different times. DeWitt noticed a lot of other problems as well. He'd spent many years writing and working on a book where he argued that the Pentateuch should more properly be called a Tetratuch, with the book of Deuteronomy being attached later during the time of Josiah, or at least a primitive form of it. He was actually going to publish a book about how Deuteronomy was linked to Josiah, but he turned his head, and all of a sudden, at the same time he publishes his work, gearing up for his next one, Johann Vater comes around and publishes a work about how Deuteronomy is linked with the historical books. So these ideas together cause a lot of scholars to believe that there was, in fact, a hexateuch, that is from Genesis through Joshua, like one single word from Genesis through Joshua. Joshua is seen as being part of the same JEDP tradition. I do want to note, however, these are more modern creations. We have no evidence of a compilation including the Torah and Joshua as a standalone text. In fact, I think our earliest canonical description by Josephus separates the Torah and the rest of the books. He specifically cites the 5 books of Moses and then goes on to cite the prophets. This also applies to the idea of a Tetratoch, so the story from Genesis through Numbers. These are more modern day hypothetical creations rather than ancient attested documents. So when it comes to the rest of the Deuteronomistic history, DeWitt thought it was written during the exile, along with a whole bunch of other biblical literature. So he, along with a few others at the time, noticed that the historical books of Joshua through 2 Kings were very similar. I mean, so similar, they must share authors. People like DeWitt are the reason we even have the word Deuteronomistic. So we can go to the next slide. So in 1943, Martin Noth published a pretty short work based on an earlier study done by Heinrich Ewald, not sure how to pronounce it. So this was the foundational work for the idea of not only a pre-exilic work, but an exilic redaction of the work as well. So it would have been written in 2 stages. At first, you have an initial history written as Josianic propaganda, then an exilic redaction. According to Noth, however, the Deuteronomist used many sources to compile a history. This included not only the works that are directly cited in the Deuteronomistic history, but also shorter narratives like the history of David's rise. He believed that this was a standalone text. This would have been written during the occupation, and he places it somewhere around 560 BCE. So he believes that it was all exilic. The reason he thought there was no way a pre-exilic edition could have existed was because how it treated the monarchy in Israel in general in such a somber way. Like, it's your fault. You did this to yourself, kind of thing, when talking about the exile. This idea wouldn't be accepted immediately. It would gain more acceptance in the 50s, though. There was an initial pushback from people like Eisfeld. His primary concern was that an evolution of the text, or diachronic concern, could not be established because there were too many contradictions. How could a later author not account for these or edit these out? For example, the issue of timing in Joshua 1 through 3, and I know we're going to cover that today. In Joshua 1:11, Joshua commands the people through his own officers, prepare your provisions, for in 3 days you are to cross over this Jordan, to go in to take possession of the land that the Lord your God gives you to possess. So keep that in mind. The people will get there in 3 days. In Joshua 2, spies are sent to the land, but they're essentially staying with a prostitute who lived in the city wall. When the king finds out, the spies are told to go hide in the hill country for 3 days to stay safe in 216. They're told to stay safe for 3 days in 216, and then they do it in 222. So after hiding for 3 days, they return to Joshua at the end of chapter 2. So surely this is where they enter the land, right? Just like the old warlord said. Unfortunately, no. While the next chapter, chapter 3, is the entrance into the land, it's only after another 4 days. When they get to the Jordan, they camp there for 3 days. And on that day, the people are told, tomorrow we set out in 3:5. So altogether, that's a 3 days waiting for the spies to return, the 3 days camping, plus if you want to count that extra day, the day they actually were entering the land. This, of course, led people like Noth to go, hey, that whole chapter 2 thing was probably added, and led Eisfeld to go, yeah, but if 1 and 3 were together, why is there this double future proclamation of entering the land in 1:11 and 3:2? And why is the first one on the 3rd day, but the second one after 3 days? So, yeah, it does get a little weird, but the issue wasn't exactly with Noth's model. It was more about how it was put together. But either way, we can go on to the next slide here. So these are adaptations and competition to Noth's model. So Noth's model garnered a lot of support in German scholarship, while scholars in the US leaned more toward F.M. Cross's competing idea. So Cross decided to bring it back to the OG ideas of DeWitt and Ewald. There were 2 layers to the Deuteronomistic history, one pre-exilic and the other exilic. He believed that the original, or Josianic, ending to the text, was in 2 2 Kings 25:23, where we're told that neither before nor after Josiah was there a king like him who turned to the Lord as he did, with all his heart and with all his soul and with all his strength, in accordance with all the law of Moses. Did you catch it? Nor after. If this was written in the period of Josiah, saying nor after would make no sense. Everyone at the time would be like, what the fuck are you talking about? You don't know that. The fuck you mean after? So if this was written in the period of Josiah, sorry. So yeah, to them it was just like, listen, there was no way this could have been the original ending. There's no way this could have been written during the period of Josiah. Concerns like that led to another influential school called the Göttingen School, because it was centered around a group of scholars in Göttingen, Germany. This was headed by Rudolf Smend, and later his model was added upon by his students, but it shared many similarities to Knox models. In this model, the entire Deuteronomistic history is exilic, but it was written in layers. So first there was a Deuteronomistic historian, an initial DTRH, that we'll just say that the DTRH, whenever I use that sigla, it's the Deuteronomistic historian, the guy writing it. We're going to get some more sigla in just a bit. So the guy who initially wrote to explain the exile. However, there was a later author, according to Smend, about a decade later, around 560 BCE, that added a few things here and there to basically correct the Deuteronomistic historian. This is usually termed DTRN. And N here stands for nomistic, or concerning the law. It's coming from the Greek word for law, nomos. His students would later hypothesize another later layer, also exilic, that was related to a prophetic school, which they called DTRP. This isn't too far off base. There are definitely a ton of similarities in these texts and the prophetic works. There's a whole book written about it that I read through as well. So there's a ton to cover when it comes to connections with the prophets. Viola, one of the students, would go further and actually argue that the texts favoring the monarchy were from the Deuteronomistic historian, while any text suggesting David was in sin was from DTRP. He had a few other benchmarks as well, but he did accept that there was extant pre-Deuteronomistic historian material that was constructed in a narrative way, like the way we have the Deuteronomistic history now, but it was compiled into these narratives during this period if it existed by itself at all. The problem doesn't really end there. In the 90s, Provan and Lofnik separately came to two conclusions that gave us another look, or another way to look at this issue. Provan believed that the initial composition of the Deuteronomistic history consisted of just Samuel and Kings, or at least the bulk of them, and was written during Josiah's time. Lofnik came to a conclusion about the compilation of Deuteronomy through Joshua, saying that they form a conquest narrative, and he called this layer DTRL, coming from the word for land conquest, the German word for land conquest. And I'm not even going to try to pronounce that word. I looked it up. Holy shit. No, it's like one of those German words that's, made of like 18 other German words. So it kind of left judges in a weird spot, but the idea of seeing a historical narrative and a more mythical conquest narrative isn't actually the worst idea, in my opinion. So we can go to the next slide here. So, untangling the mess. How do we untangle this mess of ideas? And it is a mess, right? It seems like it's ridiculous. There's so many siglas, so many layers. How are we supposed to keep track of all of it? Well, that's easy. We make a bigger mess. So how is a work filled with so many contradictions, yet so many weird consistencies? While the story doesn't fully make sense when read critically, it contains similar themes and language throughout. At least if it had one author, it would be far more internally logical. So how do we explain it all? Perhaps it's best to talk about a Deuteronomistic school, and this is the kind of the route that I take. This would be a scribal school representing its own tradition and writing style that would develop the text over time depending on their social situation. This is a pretty basic model and seems pretty attractive, but then again, so does Cross's model at first glance. So we need to make sure we look at it critically. In my opinion, a Deuteronomistic school makes a lot of sense, but the details can definitely change, as in when was the first version and when were the additions. Van Setter's goes back to the single exilic author, arguing for the general unity of the Deuteronomistic history, while people like Romer argue for a Deuteronomistic historian in the Josianic period, whose edition was subsequently edited in the exilic and post-exilic periods. So to be sure, Romer makes a pretty strong case against the unity, and Van Setters argues that many of the literary motifs feature in Babylonian and Assyrian texts. He also parallels the historiography traditions in Egypt, Greece, and the Hittite Empire to argue for this exilic date and how the majority of it is basically from the exilic period. The old stuff was basically a late, like, and when I say old stuff, I mean the stuff that is chronologically older, as in, like, Joshua, Judges, David's Rise, like the old stuff, not like old textually. So the old stuff was basically a late fiction used to justify a lot of the current events. And to quickly jump back to the initial discussion of Until This Day appearances, I want to mention Child's idea that that these were later editions referring to the time of the redactor. So you'd have an initial text written, and then a later copyist in the future would be like, oh, that's still around now. I'm just going to add Until This Day kind of thing. So next slide here. Yeah, so some basic takeaways. These are some general models for interpretation we can use. You can think of them as just very basic frameworks. So you have pre-exilic, exilic, and then post-exilic. You have exilic with exilic era redactions. You have this idea of a single exilic author, or you have a pre-exilic version and an exilic one, with or without redactions. So these are more general models, right? You have a lot of options in your potential frameworks, but there are probably other considerations that haven't been discussed here. Any of these general models can include other source material or previous documents and stories that existed before the codification period as well. Essentially, unraveling the Deuteronomistic history is incredibly difficult and has caused problems for like nearly 200 years of critical endeavors. There are both contradictions and thematic unities. There are borrowed literary motifs and unique ones. There's just a lot that goes into understanding these sets of books, and I really hope this gives everyone watching a good crash course on understanding scholarly discourse surrounding it. And the last slide is just it's just sources. So
Hey, Lauren, so if I hear you right, when I read my MacArthur Study Bible, and on the authorship and date, he says, and I quote, although the author is not named, the most probable candidate is Joshua, who was the key eyewitness to the events recorded. Maybe a little bit off. Is that what I'm hearing?
maybe a little bit off, just a little. But yeah, that was
Mm-hmm.
the presentation. Hopefully that at least gives you guys some
Well done.
some
Well
sort of
done.
context.
I have to love how they're willing to believe whatever source they feel gives them the most plausibility, as opposed to what the evidence actually says. But the problem of insisting that a traditional author is the real author is something you run into all through, including in the New Testament. I have run into so many Christians who will flip their shit if you point out that the Gospels were not written by Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, especially not John. Nobody thinks that who knows anything about this at all. And they will get so angry with you, even when you point out that the text never even says that. It's a later attribution. You're not calling the Bible a liar. You're just saying traditions are not always 100% reliable. Woohoo.
Speaking of calling out a liar on this, somebody made a video on me earlier this week, and I just posted a reply to it yesterday, where they called me a liar for saying that the book of Job was not the oldest book in the Bible, and I'm a liar for saying that, because everybody knows that Job was written in 1500 or so BCE.
Oh,
Yeah, that old
God's
classic
sake.
presupposition based on a very old understanding of the text.
Yeah, the old scholarship once said this. Therefore, if you ever hold any other opinion for any reason, you are a liar. And that's, again, and one of the things, because I realize that not everyone who watches is necessarily going to take a course in biblical scholarship. I hope, if you get nothing else from Lawrence's excellent presentation, you understand that putting together where these things come from is not simple, it's not complex, and we do not have 100% certainty on anything. I happen to think one of the only things I felt the need to comment on at any point during that was the fact that when believers are copying out and adapting sacred texts from the past, they often feel an obligation to retain certain phrasing, certain things. There's a feeling of handling something sacred and not wanting to change it too much, which can lead to the preservation of contradictions. Whereas a purely secular, I don't believe any of this shit, I just want to make a clear story person would totally have fixed those contradictions. And I think that probably affects all kinds of things about how these things were assembled, because the people who adapted these texts also believed in them, which seems like a bit of a contradiction in terms at moments, but it's not. The human mind, when it comes to religion, is a very weird thing and does not behave in a manner we would consider rational. So
Mr. Crennan comments, Lawrence, thank you so much for that fascinating, informative material.
Yeah, I felt like there was a lot to cover because there are so many divergent opinions on this, and I kind of needed to give people a crash course on it, because going into it blind, you're going to hear a lot of different accounts and be like, well, why do they disagree so hard on like this verse or this passage or something?
If you don't mind, I'd like to separate just your presentation and make a separate video on that.
Oh, you know what? That's better than me doing it.
If you would prefer to do it.
Listen, I know that if I post it, like no one's gonna watch it, so you should definitely do
that. All right, I'll be happy to.
I mean, you could just cut it out of the show and put it up, and then Lawrence can do his own additional video if he wants. Yeah. But it's great, and now I'm wondering, okay, which of these models do I use to highlight my Deuteronomistic history by authorship? Because I don't
yeah,
the
good luck.
Good luck. The maypole effect.
Yeah, like one of the biggest concerns is 2 Samuel 7 with the dynastic promise. So while that definitely sounds pre-exilic, right? And
Messiah, yeah.
Right. What Van Setters points out is that, listen, these kinds of promises, these kinds of I guess what was the phrasing he used? Like kinds of oracles, something like that. These are used in other ancient Near Eastern literature written, kind of after the fact to kind of justify something else, right? Or kind of be like, this is the hope, this is what we should strive for, kind of thing. Which I don't know if I fully buy into that idea, but it is a very interesting hypothesis because of the other ancient Near Eastern parallels, which they do exist. They're not like, so plentiful that, everyone would have known them or something like that, but they are extant.
And that's fair. And honestly, scripture can be used for either to retcon a prophecy to say we were always destined to do this thing, look at us, or to prophesy a future state that you want people to drive towards. Though if you're going to do that, it pays not to be too specific. The line of David might be a bit specific, but not necessarily. You could always pull some schmuck and say he's actually of the line of David, and it'll work that for you. So you can either justify or inspire with religion, and either of those is a perfectly valid reason for someone to have written that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why it's so complicated going into this. It's like, how do we cut this to a certain period? It's so hard.
All right. So are we going to read this thing?
Yes, we are.
Okay. And who wants to do the reading today? We'll start the reading.
So I talked
think
for a while, so
Mark said that he was
Volunteer.
muted.
Yeah, let's get Mark.
Okay.
You can
Okay.
finish this chapter. Actually, it's 18 verses.
All right. I'll be reading from JPS. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' attendant, "My servant Moses is dead. Prepare to cross the Jordan together with all this people into the land that I'm giving to the Israelites. Every spot on which your foot treads I give to you, as I promised Moses. Your territory shall extend from the wilderness of Lebanon to the great river, the river Euphrates, on the east, the whole Hittite country, and up to the Mediterranean Sea on the west. No one shall be able to resist you as long as you live. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. I will not fail you or forsake you. Be strong and resolute, for you shall apportion to this people the land that I swore their fathers to assign to them. You must be very strong and resolute to observe faithfully all the teaching that my servant Moses enjoined upon you. Do not deviate from it to the right or to the left, that you may be successful wherever you go. Let not this book of the teaching cease from your lips, but recite it every day and night, so that you may observe faithfully all that is written on it. Only then will you prosper in your undertakings, and only then will you be successful. I charged you, be strong and resolute. Don't be terrified or dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go." Joshua thereupon gave orders to the officials of the people. "Go through the camp and charge the people, and thus get provisions ready, for in 3 days' time you're to cross the Jordan in order to enter and possess the land that the Lord your God is giving you as a possession." Then Joshua said to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh, "Remember what Moses, the servant of the Lord, enjoined upon you when he said, 'The Lord your God is granting you a heaven. He's assigned this territory to you. Let your wives, children, and livestock remain in the land that Moses assigned to you on this side of the Jordan. But every one of your fighting men shall go across armed in the van of your kingsmen, and you shall assist them until the Lord has given you kingsmen a haven, such as you have, and they too have gained possession of the land the Lord your God has assigned to them. Then you may return to the land on the east side of the Jordan, which Moses, the servant of the Lord, assigned to you as your possession, and you may possess it." They answered Joshua, "We will do everything you've commanded us, and we will go wherever you send us. We will obey you just as we obeyed Moses. Let but the Lord your God be with you as he was with Moses. Any man who flouts your commands and does not obey every order you give him shall be put to death. Only be strong and resolute."
Yeah, nice ending little phrase there, huh? Yeah,
Mm.
so on this one, right, you already have like potentially a few layers, right? Because you have like suggestions that they're going to be in the land for forever, but they also have the whole thing about reading out the law, right? So at this point in time, you would have and remember, this entire chapter could also have multiple layers. So
Mhm.
it's really tough to parse and to to go along with the rest of it once we keep reading into a coherent model that has no issues, because every model has issues. So the reading of the you shall meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to act in accordance with all that is written. So that's like, well, is this like a tradition thing? Are they talking about, they're referencing probably some tradition they already have. So is this from like a nomistic layer, right? Like what section, where exactly are we in time that this has to be written down? So you can already see the amount of issues that it causes.
Absolutely. Although I would like to say, and this is just my own thought, but with the 3 days thing specifically, because you already brought it up, I would contend it's quite possible that doesn't actually mean 3 literal days. The phrase three is one of the magic numbers. The 3 is the number of perfection, yada, yada. I know, at least I've heard in some cultures, that like, if you ask someone for something and they say, oh, I'll have it in 3 days, it means I'll never have it. Go away. But it's not polite to say that. It's
I like when they say that you'll have it in 24 business hours. They have no idea what they're saying. Because if a business day is 8 hours, then you're telling me it's going to be in 3 days. But nobody who says that knows that that's what they're saying.
Yeah, because they don't do math. They don't like the math, which is why we have toner.
And the
I was
with
stopping
that
you.
though, it's hard always to say that, at least for me, to say that 3 is a magic number, because it's so small and pops up everywhere in like life.
I know,
It's
but
just tough.
it is tough, but it's also, when it talks about the completion of things, you have bigger things are 40 days of fasting, 40 years in the wilderness, 40. 7 is supposed to, 3 is, as I understand it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Jews, 3 is the number of completion, 7 is double completion plus 1 for good measure. And so sort of perfection. It's one of those things, like, I'm just saying it's plausible. I'm not saying that 3 days never means 3 days. I'm saying something like this could mean, like, give an idea of like how long you have to prep. Like, you have time to prep, but don't wait around.
So this isn't
3 is
foreshadowing the resurrection.
Oh, right. Sorry. I forgot. It's all about Jesus.
There's one thing which is like, if you do something 3 times, it's called a chazaka. It's like it's a habit. If you've done it 3 times, you have to keep doing it, sort of thing. I don't know where
I
that
also
comes
heard
from.
that there was the belief was that it took about up to 3 days for the soul to leave the body after the person died. That's why Jesus' resurrection on the 3rd day was all that more meaningful, because by then he should have been really dead.
He's
So if it
not
takes
really
3
me.
days for the soul to leave the body, just imagine what you're going through. Damn, this is really uncomfortable. I'd like to get out of here.
And then also the possibility of ruling death without really knowing, like someone being in some kind of coma state and then being buried or
Yeah.
something. So there's like
It was a normal thing to
possibility.
like leave the body out for a few days, and just in case they might wake up. And I think there was even a practice at some point to bury people with a little bell. So if
Oh,
they
that was definitely a thing. Although I think I heard, at least in one Jewish folk tale, that the idea was you had to wait overnight with the body, and the reason for the wake was so that the devil wouldn't come and possess their body. Or a devil.
I've done that by myself in a what's it called? Not in the place where they prepare the body for burial, where there's fridges and
Morgue?
stuff.
Morgue.
Yeah, I guess like kind of like a morgue, but like non-commercial. And and I by myself in this building, and I'm gonna explore. And I open the fridge, and there's a body wrapped in plastic.
Ugh.
So
Yeah.
somebody in the chat notes that Jesus died on Friday afternoon, was resurrected on Sunday morning, 1.5 days.
Yeah, he had a bad weekend for your sins, and I really think we need to show more appreciation.
He sacrificed his Saturday.
My God. I mean, this selflessness.
And there's always like the weird debate here between like in 3 days and after 3 days.
On
So
the third day.
yeah, on the third day.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like
And
it's stuff like that.
honestly, that's kind of an argument for my point that the 3
Right.
days is like a 2 nights, 3
But
days. It's a magic thing. It's a bit of a not like always, but often.
And also, yeah, note how at the beginning of this chapter, it's very warlike, and then it turns to the law.
Mm,
So like the purpose of this stuff kind of changes already in the
Mhm.
text very slightly.
Yeah.
mhm.
Even that verb that he uses, often translated "get up," it's in the imperative tense. So it's like Moses died. Let's go. Like there's like a sense of urgency I'm picking up on. Just thinking about the
Yeah.
Oh
grammar.
yeah. Yeah, I get it. It's, quick, the crazy guy's dead, run for it. But yeah, it's almost like Yahweh's a war god, really obsessed with killing things. Do you have a puppy doing a puppy thing?
Yeah, he's trying to claw his way into the python cage.
Oh my gosh, leave the snakes alone. Danger noodle.
Yeah.
Have you considered stopping him, Arn?
Yeah, this is the same dog who actually figured out how to crash through the glass to get in with the boa constrictor. The dog has no sense.
The dog apparently has a death wish. Okay.
Yes, the
Is
dog is
anyone
also
going
the
to say?
if the snake were an adult, if that snake were an adult, that would be a food item.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to know a little
Anyway.
more about the territory. Like there's the description there in verse 4. That it sounds like
Yeah.
he's setting boundaries for the land, but that description doesn't always match what's in Genesis.
Right.
What can you guys tell us about that?
Well, I mean,
I can
first of all,
say
it's
that there
like
is a
way bigger than
Yeah, it's like
than
from
we
this.
normally
Yeah,
think of Israel.
it's kind of, I think the basis of this, it's kind of a conspiracy theory of the Greater Israel idea, which is like,
Mm.
oh, Jews, when the Messiah comes, it will create a messianic state or whatever with a kingdom that will stretch from the Mediterranean Sea to the Euphrates. There is a Jewish tradition though about this particular usage that says that this is saying to Joshua, if you were to conquer the land properly and to walk on all of these places, they would become part of the land. But because of what happened in the end, he didn't. They didn't successfully destroy all of the Canaanite scum. They weren't.
Yes.
They
You
they
only
they,
did
they
a
weren't.
partial genocide and you pissed God off. How dare you not kill everybody?
Yeah, that's the true moral of the story. It's not that oh God wants to genocide everyone. It's how bad the people were to not listen to him and genocide everyone. That's the main
Yes,
idea.
it's true. God is
The people were so
very
nice.
pro genocide. Yeah, the people were so nice. They left a few women and children alive. I mean, just what were they thinking?
Mm.
Oh, yeah, it's.
So we're ready to jump on to chapter 2?
I have commentary, unfortunately.
Oh, I just wanted to make one comment regarding
Yeah.
what Mark just mentioned about the land. It seems a reference, at least in part, to the previous, just previously in Deuteronomy, when they said they took over the one land on the far side of the Jordan from the Promised Land, and a couple of the tribes said, "Hey, this is a lot of pasture. We have a lot of goats. How about we set up here?" And Moses goes to God, and God's like, as long as you send all your men to come and you do the genociding with us, then only when we're done killing, only when I'm done killing, you can go back and make homes. So, but
Yeah.
there is a continuity there that I think speaks to Deuteronomistic authorship and connectivity.
Yeah, and there is a discrepancy. I think actually it might be in the next chapter where it says that there's 40,000 men from these tribes, but when we count them in Deuteronomy, or no, it must be Numbers, there's like 100,000. So I wonder if it was a textual edit that says, "Oh, mighty men of war," to imply that they didn't send all of them, they only sent the strong ones or something like that.
Oh yeah, but also like mighty men in the Deuteronomistic history is a certain group of people, like David's mighty
Mm,
men that we'll get to.
yeah.
So it might have a different designation in Deuteronomistic language.
Mm, right. Yeah. Yeah. It's like maybe the usage of mighty men was to imply, oh, okay, they're not sending all the men to fight, only the strong ones.
Yeah, they're the best of the best.
Yeah. 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 Which is still 40,000 out of 100,000. It's quite a lot, but.
Okay, so before I start my commentary, I have 3 general notes. So first of all, for my bibliography, I have new traditional commentators. We still have people like Rashi, Gersonides, and Abavanel, but now we have David Kimchi, who is known by his acronym Radak in Jewish circles, but I'll call him Kimchi, Joseph Kara, Joseph Ibn Kaspi, and Isaiah Titrani. We don't have Ibn Ezra or Nachmanides or the likes, Rashbam, etc. here, but I do have these guys. For my commentaries, I have Shmuel Achituv, Trent Butler, Thomas Dozeman, Gershon Galil, Yair Zakovitch, and Richard Nelson, who was in Deuteronomy as well. So that's one thing.
Yeah.
The second thing, in my commentary, I will sometimes compare between the Masoretic text and the Septuagint, because these are two, like, the two versions are quite different when it comes to various details.
I think I think maybe it's Joshua, might be Judges, but one of the books in the Septuagint is like 5% longer or something. Like it's just straight up
Yeah,
quite a bit longer.
yeah, and commentators debate whether one thing is from the um oh no one thing from sorry what I wanted to say. Oh yeah, so commentators debate whether the Septuagint is the original, Masoretic is the original, or maybe both are not, and the original is something else. So we have that as well. And thirdly, ancient Christian commentators love this book because they compare Joshua with Jesus. They do this a lot. For example,
He's got like
Origin.
a similar name.
Yes, that's one thing, but also, for example, Origin argued that the Lord Jesus assumed power after the death of the law, which is prefigured by Joshua's succession of Moses. And Lactantius and Chrysostom wrote that since Moses changed his name from Hoshea to Jesus, Joshua, he prefigured Christ by victoriously leading the Israelites into the promised land and by ushering in the new law. So you'll see how they always attribute something in the book of Joshua as something that has been prefigured already by um, by Jesus, or like something like a Trinity or the church, or that. So you'll see that a lot here, and I found it really amusing.
I
And not
can't
only that,
blame
but
you.
they look at the unfulfilled geographical possessed regions of that promise or of the conquest and say, well, that's because that's reserved for the second coming.
It's yeah, I can understand why Christian authors love it, but they're always pointing out how this or that was prefigured, and I'm kind of like, you realize it makes a hell of a lot more sense to just say the authors fucking copied from the crib notes of the thing that already existed. Yeah, but no, it's all prefiguration because Jesus is magic and shit. Joshua is the same name. It's the same name. Yeshua, Jesus, same thing. Tomato, tomato. Yeah, again, it's part of the reason I'm a mythicist, because even if there was a dude, everything in the records is just copy paste, copy paste, copy paste, and I'm done with
I mean,
pretending.
like all there were a whole bunch of a whole bunch of men of God running around at the time, right? And they tried to kind of emulate those older prophets. So that you will find similarities in prophetic works, you will find similarities in the Deuteronomistic history, and these big characters are kind of in in the first century. A lot of people are like, hey, let's emulate these guys because we want to kind of make it clear that we are the successors to them. So like, because we do have like references to multiple of those of people like that, like yeah, I mean, I don't think Jesus did all the stuff that he said to have done, right? But I do think that this another one that does kind of the same thing isn't a huge leap, I guess, to me.
Mhm. Yeah, no, not at all, not at all. And another reason why I think, unfortunately, but it has to be said, unfortunately, I think another reason why Christian commentators love this so much is because, particularly during expansionist times, during the Holy Roman Empire, during the Crusades, during the colonization and in subjugation of the world, Christians would constantly try and claim that they were the new Jews because they had the new covenant, so they get to retroactively take everything. And then any number of genocides could be justified via this genocidal justification. And I'm not saying that without it, they would never have happened and that nobody ever just did that shit for conquest. Of course they did. But they were quite happy to use the excuse, theologically speaking, and it's unfortunate.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think I'll start my commentary now. So on verse 1, the servant of Yahweh, this phrase does not appear in the Septuagint. Dozeman and Butler note that the opinions of several commentators regarding the textual problem and its meaning. R.G. Bowling and G.E. Wright suggest haplography in the Septuagint. Immanuel Tov suggested that the servant of Yahweh is a Deuteronomistic addition. Klaus Bibelstein suggested that Septuagint is the original reading, and the Masoretic text reflects the growing status of Moses in post-exilic literature. Michael van der Meer suggested that the Septuagint is making a stylistic shortening, quote unquote, to avoid redundancy of the epithet in the Masoretic text.
I think what's interesting is that at the end of Joshua, doesn't it like eventually say of Joshua that he's the servant of Yahweh, and then all throughout the book, he's the assistant of Moses, kind of like that contrast. Or
yeah, and I should note that the word used for servant here is Oved, which can also mean slave. So,
Oh, good, a slave to Allah. We haven't heard that one before.
Yeah, I think I read a commentary, a Jewish commentary, or not myself, something about Joshua, where it says something like, a slave is the lowest form that anyone can be, but being a slave to God is the highest anyone can want to be.
I've heard that from Christians too. Remember the debate with Christopher Hitchens, where he ran into the one fellow who's like, "Yes, I'm a slave to Christ." And he's like, "That is the most disgusting thing. I need to have a shower now. I can't believe you said that." And it just, I sympathize, especially as one who was taught to think that way. It's pretty fucking horrible.
Now, on verse 4, the great river, the Euphrates. Ahituv comments, this is considered the extreme border of the promised land, attested in Genesis 15:18. The background to the notion of the northeastern border of the promised land is not clear. One assumption is that it represents the borders of the United Monarchy during the height of its territorial expansion. Compare 2 Samuel 8:3 and 1 Kings 5 verses 1 and 4. More likely, however, is that there is a reflection of the later province of beyond the river, i.e. Eber Nari, either from the days of the Neo-Babylonian Empire or even the Persian Empire.
Possible.
On all the Hittite country, according to Ahituv, this does not refer to the Hittite kingdom, which was abolished during the 13th to 12th century BCE. Neither does it refer to the Neo-Hittite kingdoms established in Anatolia and Syria on the ruins of the Hittite kingdom. He writes that perhaps there is a translation of the Neo-Assyrian Mathati, i.e. land of Chet, which designates all the lands west of the Euphrates, including Israel. This phrase is not found in Deuteronomy nor in the Septuagint. Ahituv writes that perhaps this phrase is a gloss or a footnote to the Masoretic text. Dozeman notes that Hittites are portrayed in the Bible both positively and negatively. In Joshua, the Hittites are seen as an indigenous nation whose presence in the promised land threatens the purity of the Israelites and thus requires their extermination.
So God always hated indigenous people. That's disturbing.
I mean, maybe not for the Gibeonites, but we'll get to that and we'll see.
Yeah.
So on verse 5, no one will be able to stand against you. The Masoretic text reads against you in the second person plural, in Hebrew lefanecha. Septuagint, Vulgate, and Peshitta read you in the second person plural, and thus broaden this statement to include the entire nation. Butler writes that the early translations seek to achieve grammatical continuity with the preceding verses by reading the second person plural. On verse 6, be strong and courage. Be strong
I'm
and
sorry.
courage.
I meant to jump in. We had a comment. Zekuse says, was that verse 4 the first reference to the phrase from the river to the sea?
No, the phrase river is not the Jordan River.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh.
and also the verse 4 doesn't really put them
Yeah,
together.
it's
There's
not
something
really
in
the
between.
borders of Canaan. It's like the larger borders of Canaan, but it's not really. It's more ideological than reality. So no.
Yeah, the river we're talking about here is the Jordan River. That's the big sacred river that, that's not always the river that people are talking about in other contexts, but in this context, it definitely is.
Yeah, it wouldn't have been Jordan wouldn't have been considered part of the borders of the land because the Trans-Jordan areas would have been part of the land as well. So
Yeah.
Yeah, but crossing the Jordan was a big thing. Sorry.
Yeah. On verse 6, be strong and courageous. In Hebrew, it's chazak ve'ematz. This phrase appears 4 times in this chapter, verses 7, 10, and 18, and in Deuteronomy 3:28, 31:6, and 7:23, verses 7 and 23. Dozeman writes that this term often describes courage to undertake war, as seen in Sichon's decision to wage war against Israel in Deuteronomy 2:30, or Hezekiah's decision to resist Sennacherib in 2 Chronicles 32:7. He notes the opinion of L.L. Rowlett that the phrase is part of the military terminology within the Deuteronomistic history. Septuagint reads, be strong and manly.
Die for your country like a real man.
Yeah. On verse 7, all the law. This phrase is omitted from the Septuagint. Zakovitch notes that do not turn from it, al tasur mimeno in Hebrew, is a masculine singular and not feminine, mimena, which would fit the Torah since it is a female word. He writes, therefore, that all the law is in addition to the Masoretic text, probably influenced from verse 8. On verse 8, Book of the Law. Rashi, based on Genesis Rabbah 6:9, identified this book as Deuteronomy. This identification is accepted by Ahituv and Zakovitch, based on Deuteronomy 17, verses 18 to 19, and 2 Kings 22, 8 forward. Nelson writes that the question of obedience to the book of the law is a central theme of the Deuteronomistic history, which will continue to reappear, seen in 8:31, 22:5, and 23:6. On verse 11, get your provisions ready. Kimchi writes that provisions, in Hebrew tzeidah, refers to all types of food excluding bread, since the manna was still dropping down wherever the Israelites went until they reached Israel, which was the day after Passover, seen in Joshua 5, verses 11 to 12. Caesarius of Arel writes, for this reason, Joshua said to the people, prepare your provisions for the journey. Today, if you willingly listen, Christ our Lord says to you, if you will follow me, prepare food for the journey. This food is good works, which accompany us like faithful food for the journey up to future bliss. Therefore, consider that if each one does not prepare food for himself, he cannot follow Joshua when he enters the land of promise.
It feels like P-Town is back here.
At least there is like, well, they are old, so at least that's a positive, I guess. I don't know.
yeah. So Thomas mentioned this idea in Jewish tradition that the manna that the Israelites sustained themselves on manna until they crossed the Jordan, and then from then on they had to get food from the land.
I think it's in the Bible as well, but once we'll get there.
Yeah? Okay.
Yeah, I think so. So 3 days from now, Caesarius of Arel, again, he writes, Joshua said to the people when he came to the Jordan, prepare your provisions until the 3rd day. The 3rd day, dearly beloved, we recognize as the mystery of the Trinity. What food should we prepare so that we may come to the 3rd day? It seems to me that this food should be understood as faith. For Christians, it is by faith that they believe in the Trinity and arrive at the sacrament of baptism. Therefore, what Joshua then told his people, the true Joshua, or Jesus, now tells the Christian people through his ministers. Indeed, what else does this mean? Prepare your provisions until the third day, except to receive the mystery of the Trinity.
Ridiculous.
That
And
is,
that could also be
oh,
interpreting the preparing for the Passover meal before crucifixion as well.
eh, the contortions.
Mhm.
Like, if you say, as a pastor, we can also see reflections of this idea carried on in the Trinity or something, that's one thing. To say that that's what fucking Joshua is standing around talking to these desert weary Israelites, pulling your late Christian theology out of his ass for them, it's ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. On verse 12, Nelson comments, viewing these 2.5 tribes as a distinct entity accords with Deuteronomistic convention, but raises disturbing questions for the reader about their place in the national story. Although an integral part of the idealized tribal system and of the United and Northern monarchies, their territory was not Canaan in the traditional sense, reflected in either Egyptian texts or the Hebrew Bible. For example, Numbers 34:2, verses 10 and 12, Deuteronomy 32:49. This concern with the eastern tribes will surface again at the Jordan crossing, 4 verses 12 to 13. In the summary of 12 verses 1 through 6, in the introduction to land allotment in 13 verses 8 to 32, and ultimately in the conflict related in chapter 22. Here in chapter 1, these tribes are highlighted in order to emphasize that all Israel, quote unquote, theological scheme of Joshua, to emphasize the all Israel theological scheme of Joshua. All groups engage in a unified conquest coordinated by a single leader. They also represent a continuing claim on eastern territories that had been lost to Moab in the mid 9th century and to Assyria after 732 BCE. On verse 14, east of the Jordan. In Hebrew, it's Be'ever HaYarden, beyond the Jordan. Dozeman writes that this term doesn't designate a specific region and could refer to either east or west, depending on the narrator's standpoint. He further writes, the use of the term in verse 14 creates a problem of meaning in the present context. It describes the land east of the Jordan River with the assumption that the speaker is located west of the Jordan. In verse 14, however, the Israelites are still located east of the Jordan, which makes the phrase beyond the Jordan a reference to the land west of the Jordan. Septuagint lacks beyond the Jordan as well as the reference to Moses in the land which he gave you. Tov identifies the Masoretic text pluses and the reference to Moses and the land west of the Jordan as part of a second edition of the book of Joshua. Lea Mazo detects a larger ideological tendency in the Masoretic text, in which the land east of the Jordan is viewed negatively by indicating that it is a gift of Moses and not Yahweh. She also notes the negative assessment of the land east of the Jordan in the Masoretic text of 22:19, where the Septuagint evaluation of its smallness is stated to be its impurity. Van der Meer suggests that the Septuagint minuses represent a smoothing out of the Greek text for the purpose of clarity.
Clarity, or maybe just trying to avoid getting into trouble. Seems awful convenient to leave a lot of little details that could like pose problems with if you think critically.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
We don't do
On
that
that
here.
on that same verse, ready for battle, in Hebrew it's chamushim. The word appears in Exodus 13:18, Numbers 32:17, and Judges 7:11, and could mean well equipped or armed, as seen by early translations, Kimchi, KJV, and Zakovitch, or arranged in battle array, according to BDB and Ahituv. Nelson writes that chamushim is literally arranged by 5 or 50. That is, either divided into units of 50 soldiers each, seen in 2 Kings 1:9 and Isaiah 3:3, or having an overall disposition into 5 sections. And finally, on verses 16 to 18, Zakovitch comments, the tribes of the eastern Transjordan obeyed Joshua's commandment, and his authority passed its first test successfully. They affirm the promise they made to Moses and even say, we will obey you just as we obeyed Moses, in verse 17. We can distinguish 3 parts in their sayings, and each of them expresses more than the previous one a loyalty to Joshua and a willingness to obey him. First, in verse 16, they state that they'll do anything commanded to them. Second, in verse 17, the tribes say that in their view, Joshua's authority is equal to Moses' authority. Third, in verse 18, they are committed that if anyone does not do as he says, they shall put him to death. Since Joshua does not turn to the whole people in this chapter, but rather to the tribes of the Transjordan, they thus represents the acceptance of Joshua's burden on the people.
So the phrase, whoever rebels against your word and does not obey it, whatever you may command them, will be put to death. There's your biblical morality. Obey. Or else. All right, we
So
ready
much
for
God
chapter
is-
2?
I'm ready.
Yeah. So, yeah, this chapter is fun. I will say this. Because this is where we meet Rahab the prostitute.
I thought we argued she might not have actually been a prostitute.
Well, read the chapter. Pete.
we'll
Yeah,
talk
it's-
about it.
We'll
Yes.
fight it out.
Yeah.
All right. So this one, chapter 2, Rahab and the spies. Then Joshua, son of Nun, secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab and stayed there. So they're in a Rahab. Oh, never mind. The king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out the land. So the king of Jericho sent his message to Rahab, bring out the men who came to you and entered your house, because they have come to spy out. They've come to spy out the whole land. How are they going to spy out the whole land from inside her house? But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I did not know where they had come from. At dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax that she had laid out on the roof. So the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. Before the spies lay down for the night, she went up on the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that is great, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water for the Red Sea for you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings and Amorites, the east of Jordan, whom you completely destroyed. When we heard of it, our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you, for your Lord, your God in heaven above and in the earth below. Now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. Our lives for your lives, the men assured her. You don't tell us what we are doing, and we will treat you kindly. You don't tell what we are doing, and we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land. I thought the Lord had already given them the land, but he obviously hasn't, has he?
No,
he
he's
gives it to you when you take it.
He's given them the land to possess so far.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Yeah,
Mhm.
which kind of means just go kill them. That's what it is. So
Yeah,
she
and
lets
let's
them
not
down.
forget, the ancestors to whom they were first promised, we're talking, what, 500 years before or something like that?
You gotta love how
Like,
God's promises
If
work.
we follow the Bible chronology. Yeah.
Yeah. You gotta love God's promises. It's like, hey, so I'm totally gonna give you this thing. Well, not actually. Actually, I'm gonna enslave your kids, but your great grandkids are gonna come back here and kill these people's great grandkids, and then I'm gonna give them a whole bunch of shit, and it's gonna be awesome. I think you feel that.
Yeah, and then they'll be at war perpetually in this land forever after. So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall. She said to them, go to the hills so the pursuers will not find you. Hide yourselves there 3 days until they return, then go on your way." Now the men said to her, "This oath you have made us swear will not be binding on us unless we enter the land. You have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you have brought out your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into the house, if any of them go outside your house onto the street, their blood will be on their heads. We will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on them. But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from our oath you made us swear." "Agreed," she replied. "Let it be as you say." So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. When they left, they went into the hills and stayed there 3 days until the pursuers had searched all along the road and returned without finding them. Then the 2 men started back. They went down out of the hills, forded the river, and came to Joshua, son of Nun, and told him everything that had happened to them. They said to Joshua, "The Lord has surely given us the whole land into our hands, and the people are melting in fear because of us."
So this is
Gotta
not
love
just
that biblical morality.
yeah, right. So this section, right? Not only because of the weird timing thing that we're going to get once we get to chapter 3, but also because this is kind of the way this is written. The story seems to be a it's not quite ideological. I forget the term for this, but it's kind of like this look back into the past to justify something that's happening now kind of thing. And by now, I mean when this would have been written. So let's say this was written at a time where, you know, people who saw themselves as the descendants of Rahab were somehow able to survive this conquest, right? The later author would be like, well, we were told that, you know, they'd kill everybody, but obviously not everybody was killed. How do we justify some people still surviving? We get this a few times throughout the Deuteronomistic history. In fact, those are a lot of the occurrences of until this day, about groups that are still around or under someone's control. We're going to get to it. It gets, there are a lot of examples, but if this one kind of serves as this mythological tale, as a foundation for, here is this group of people that we have not killed in this land, and here's why. So, but the thing is, because of that, it does stand as a little bit different than the rest of the conquest narrative. So most scholars do think that this entire chapter is a later edition.
I should also
It is-
note that. Go on,
Sorry,
Lou.
go ahead.
Okay, I should note that in this, I'll say it in my commentary, but there's a lot of sexual innuendos on this. Yeah.
Fair enough. I would not pick
Yeah.
up on that necessarily from the translation, but you know, that's why it's good to have people who speak the original. I was just going to say, I find Rahab interesting as a very interesting type in Jewish literature. One that I find a little bit interesting and almost perhaps a little bit redeeming of the genre, is the foreign woman who is a hero of the story by faithfulness to God and serving the interests of Israel. You've got, you know, you could argue Tamar because she was from an outside tribe, obviously, married into the family of Judah, and risked her life to you know, successfully create progeny for Judah's line. You could definitely, I think the characters that come to mind most are Ruth and Rahab. And because they are definitely Canaanite. They are definitely, and the, you know, Jews are established now. They're a big group of people, Hebrews, Israelites rather, but they are foreigners who side with and end up being heroes of the story. And I mean, to be both foreign and women and have them be the heroes of the story in some sense is a pretty big deal. It's very interesting thematically. That's one of the few times when when women are not treated like crap in the narrative. So I find it hopeful.
Star Song makes a comment that says, at the time Joshua took place, was Jericho inhabited? I heard not, but maybe I'm wrong.
I mean, if we're talking about like the time that the story is supposed to be taking place, I think it was. I don't remember 100%, but I think it was inhabited. Not
I mean,
sure.
Jericho's twice as old as the universe. The grain storage bins are 12,000 years old, so there's always that.
I'll have to check some books on that one.
But it was
from what I
it was-
remember,
yeah.
I think it was inhabited.
It
I gotta
might
look
have
it up
not
again.
been. It's not one of those, yeah.
So I have a note on that. This is from the Anchor Bible Dictionary. And then the scholar that does this is Bowling, Robert G. Bowling.
Yeah, he also read the commentary of Joshua.
He says, a 13th century setting for the Exodus and career of Moses toward the end of the century better than early is holding well. And then he says, regarding the site of Jericho, once a strongly fortified city with an urban tradition going back to pre-pottery Neolithic era, appears to have been little, if anything, more than the residence of a local strong man, a defunct town site in the 14th century, with no surviving evidence of occupation in the 13th century. Now, this is based on archaeological research.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
think
possibility that it was
the idea
already
like the walls, like Joshua brings down the walls. I think that those walls, like there is archaeology, it shows there were walls that were destroyed, and I think they're thought to be destroyed much earlier on by like an earthquake or something.
Yeah.
So
There were
it
walls
was a
destroyed
story.
several times because it was a key strategic point for invasion by various people at various times. So there were definitely lots of wars fought at Jericho, at various times by lots of different people.
So it's possible at the time of writing, they would have been like, oh, here is a city that's got destroyed walls, but they wouldn't have necessarily known that when they were writing the story of explaining who destroyed the walls, that wasn't the right time. And
I can say that.
Yeah,
they just named it and claimed it is what they did.
I touched it first. It's mine.
You can't have it. I licked it.
You just imagine God is licking Cain.
Okay, so I'll start my commentary. So we'll start in verse 1. The two spies. The identity of the two spies is unknown. According to Numbers Rabbah 16:1, these were Caleb son of Jephunneh and Phinehas son of Eliezer. Septuagint reads, two young men. They are described as such in the Masoretic text in 623. Nelson writes that the Septuagint is original, and the Masoretic text revision may have been intended to diminish the sexual implications of the original. Butler, however, notes Bieberstein's opinion that the Masoretic text is original, and Septuagint represents an expanded Hebrew text. Jerome wrote that the two messengers are symbolic for Peter and Paul, with Jesus as Joshua, who sends them to lead his people into the gospel. Caesarius of Ariel wrote that the two spies symbolize two commands, to love God and neighbor. And I should also note Origen, who also wrote that the historical account of Joshua's sending of two spies was visibly fulfilled through John the Baptist, God's messenger, who preached repentance to prostitutes and publicans.
That was Jesus. Jesus.
Wait, is a publican an innkeeper? Like a pub owner? Publican?
Actually, I thought it was a tax collector. They were really big on shitting on tax collectors for the Romans, obviously, because they were scabs, basically.
Yeah, a person who keeps a public house. In ancient Rome, a public contractor, especially one who farmed the taxes of a province. Okay, so it's both.
A little bit of.
Yeah. So on Shittim Shittim, on Shittim. So Butler comments, Shittim has ominous connotations. That's the actual Hebrew word. Yes, the Old Testament
Mm.
places Shittim, which in Hebrew means acacia woods, like the plural for acacia wood, in Moab, across the Jordan from Jericho, see Numbers 33 verses 48 to 49, and names it as the place where Moabite women led Israel astray in Numbers 25 verses 1 through 5. The precise site of Shittim is not known. It has been identified traditionally with Tel El Kefre, 7 miles east of the Jordan and 6 miles north of the Dead Sea. Most modern commentators, however, accept the identification made by Engluek, who argues that Shittim was located at present-day Tel El Hammam at Samri, located 1.5 miles or 2.5 kilometers east of Tel El Kefre. Tel El Hammam is a much larger site and more important militarily and economically. On they went and entered the house of a prostitute. Septuagint reads, they went and entered Jericho, and they entered the house of a prostitute. Zakovitch writes that this version is preferable, and the Masoretic text version is the result of homo euteleuton. He further writes, it is surprising that instead of fulfilling their spying mission, they went straight into the prostitute's house. Josephus wished to fill in the gap. After they viewed Jericho and examined its walls and gates, they went in the evening to an inn where they had supper, seen in Antiquities 5, 5, and 7. He emphasizes what was missing in the story. The spies are not acting as spies, but go straight to the prostitute's house. Josephus understood prostitute here as an innkeeper. Likewise, Targum Jonathan reads pundakita, innkeeper. Kimchi explains, in Jonathan's view, the prostitute is an innkeeper who harlots herself to all.
Yeah. Oh, she might have known secrets and stuff, so not the worst place to go if you're trying to be a spy.
I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, ladies of the night certainly hear many, many secrets from powerful men, but they don't tend to divulge them
Yeah.
without very good
I've got to
reason.
mention, I've got to admit, there is one of the traditions about Rahab, except, besides her being a great person who married Joshua, like as a traditional idea, she's converted and all that. One of the
And I'll
ideas
get to
was
that.
that she was one of the most beautiful women in the world, along with Esther and Sarah, whatever, and that men who heard her name would come to arousal.
Yeah. Yeah, about her. So I have a comment on generally about how she was viewed. So first on Rahab. The name of Rahab means wide or broad, according to BDB Dictionary. According to Tana Deve Eliyahu Zuta 22, she is called Rahab because her merit in repentance was so substantial, in Hebrew Rechova. Zakovitch writes that the name is a short Western Semitic theophoric name and is a compound of names such as Rechaviah and Rechavam. Butler writes that her name may represent a confession of faith that the god has opened the womb, with the name of the god missing. Dozeman writes that the name may also intend to underscore the sexual background of the story, or even the mythological background in which Rahab is the name of the chaos dragon in Job 26:12 and Psalms 9:11. He also notes that Rahab was viewed positively in Judaism and Christianity. Chazal described it as beautiful in Talmud Megillah 15a, a proselyte in Sifrei number 78, the ancestor of Jeremiah and Ezekiel in Ruth Rabbah 2:1, and the wife of Joshua in Talmud Megillah 14b. In the New Testament, she is an ancestor of Jesus in Matthew 1:5, a hero of faith in Hebrews 11:31, and an ethical model in extending hospitality to the spies, James 2:25. She is said to prefigure the church by Origen, Gregory of Elvira, and Chrysostom. Augustine wrote that although Ahab lied, and lying is unjust, she is rewarded for her benevolence. Casian writes that for her lie, she is found deserving an eternal blessing.
So just the takeaway here is that according to biblical morality, a lying prostitute is an ethical model.
Only if she's betraying her people into the hands of Israel to all be viciously slaughtered.
Okay, I'm going to read a couple comments. Trevor Wright says, does the mention of the tribes in Israel conflict with the indigenous tribes in this time period and place in comparison with non-biblical sources provides any historic? Can I read that again? Does the mention of the
No, you read it
tribes
right.
I read it right?
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, phrasing. But the the thing is, when it comes to the Israelite tribes, it's not like there's a lot of contemporary evidence for them designating themselves like that. Uh, but we do have, uh, maybe not at this time, but we do have, evidence of later, uh, kind of later conflicts between the people of Israel and the people of the land. But it is kind of hard to uh, have source information on some of this stuff, because if you're talking about like some little conflict by little tribes in on like some hill somewhere, like that's not always going to be recorded. Uh, so that is one issue, but we really start getting hard evidence of these kinds of conflicts from I forget the phrasing that's actually used in the Egyptian annals, but like really until like the 10th century we don't really start getting uh kind of records of the people of Israel being included in these conflicts until then.
Yeah.
So that's
It's
really when it starts.
the evidence, there's no evidence of like a wave of conquest in the way that it's described in Joshua. That
Right, yeah.
definitely didn't happen. No chance that happened. As best we understand the scholarship presently, basically the Jews were Canaanites. They were some of the tribes of Canaan that came together, and then kingdoms built up as kingdoms do from more tribal life. And then during the exile, the kingdoms, two kingdoms sort of that had always been quite connected and intertwined, combined their history and made the narrative that made them as conquerors and separated them from the indigenous people, even though it appears they were at the time indigenous to that area. So it's not clear what happened that early in anybody's history. It's all a bit it's not like there's a nice big medieval castle where you can be like, look, this happened. It's all a bit muddy, but it definitely wasn't this. It's definitely not this.
And isn't it also true that perhaps the actual chronology of when this might be happening, or the biblical if we follow the biblical chronology of what's happening, all of this Canaanite territory is a vassal of Egypt? Isn't that still the case? Like Egypt still has some sort of
I
influence on the
believe
land?
Yeah,
so.
they would
Yeah.
at this point. Yeah.
Even though it's not terribly clear exactly when this is supposed to have happened, it's definitely in the time range where
Yeah.
Egypt
The
had
biblical
political
writer seems
control.
to have been unaware of it, but yeah, according to the archaeology, that seems to.
So they ran off to Egyptian suburbs.
Eric Wander has a comment, says, was not Rahab justified by works when she had received the messengers and had sent them out another way? James 2:25, lying is wrong unless you do God a favor and hide his spies.
I mean, yeah, kind of. But like the thing is, like I think in most people's moral worldview, there wouldn't be, like, if you're lying for like an actual good cause, like it shouldn't be. It depends on the extent of the lie and the extent of the cause, but you know you could definitely say like, hey, this is fine to do if you're doing it for like some moral reason. Like I can see that argument. Now I don't think their conquest is necessarily moral, but in their worldview, if they believe that is moral, then lying to continue that would also be moral.
I will. I will mention I did mention Augustine who said regarding the Ochab lied, but the language is unjust. His quote there is, therefore no lie is just. Accordingly, when examples of lying are proposed to us from the sacred scriptures, either they are not lies but are thought so for not being understood, or if they are lies, they are not to be imitated because they cannot be just.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the positions is
She's my
it's
sister.
wrong, and the other one is gaslighting.
Basically, Augustine sounds, this is the thing. Augustine is thought to be a great thinker. He sounds like fucking Ray Comfort. Okay. I bitched about this during the 10 Commandments. One of the best written commandments, do not like bear false witness against. Don't falsely accuse in court the innocent. Really big deal. Really big deal. Good, well chosen, well phrased commandment. Not the same thing as never lie about anything ever.
Right, yeah.
No, your ass looks great in those pants. Of course, I'm not planning you a surprise party. No, I'm not hiding any Jews, you lovely Nazi gentlemen. Have a lovely day. These are all examples of passable or even virtuous lies.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I will
I was
say-
thinking of the Anne Frank example, but I didn't know if it would be okay to mention that.
It's that's well, it's a dreadful idea, but the truth of the matter is a moral adult understands that just like violence, lying is not generally virtuous, but there may be a time when it's the best choice.
Oh, I should note that.
Listen to
Sorry.
the Bible Knowledge commentary, which is a evangelical commentary regarding this. He says, after all, some say this was a cultural matter, for Rahab was born and raised among the depraved Canaanites, among whom lying was universally practiced. So she wouldn't have seen no evil in her act.
Right.
That's a little
I-
that's racist, but a little funny.
I should also note that that Augustine's quote is from a book called Against Lying. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible the original story wasn't supposed to be making her out to be a heroic figure, and she's just in it for self-interest to protect her own family. And it was more of a later a tradition that she was a righteous convert and she married
Well,
Joshua or whatever.
Either way, well,
Yeah.
and she's found to have married a fellow named Salmon in one of the genealogies.
Yeah,
of
Matthew
Christ.
says that.
Yeah, Matthew. We were discussing it before the show, but either way, she would have had to convert to do that. It's. I mean, you could even say that, and I have heard the argument that the three, one of which is not included in canon, Ruth, Esther, and Judith, they're stories of a woman in a position where she doesn't have the power of military, the power of men, the power of whatever, and uses her intelligence to protect herself and her own and to work her way in the system. That's very much what Rahab does here too. She
Yeah, it's a good story.
bets on the right side and protects her own, her family, finds a way to be like, okay. And then, all they have to do is say the house with the red strip, we don't touch it. Nobody touches anybody in there. That's the good house. Everybody else.
And if you think about what you just said, and then you think of Mary, because I think that's the whole thing with Matthew doing that in his genealogy, in the sense that perhaps there's a moral dilemma there with her being okay with being impregnated by someone other than her betrothed Joseph,
Right.
and how she is willing to work with that, and then for the sake of the kingdom, that becomes okay.
Yeah, and Esther, even to a lesser, I mean, she won a sex contest to be queen. That's not generally something that religious groups are telling you is a great idea.
Yeah, I think I remember being taught like that she didn't want to. It was like they were forced to. Like I think Mordecai would have like hid her for 6 months and then they found her the second time.
Right.
That's
And
why. Yeah.
I mean, it was a royal order. I'm not saying any of the girls had a
Mm.
choice, but she definitely made it work for her.
our end you still have, and you're muted.
Yep, I see Eric Wander offered or gifted 5 RN Raw memberships, and Atheist Carpenter says there's a lot of situational ethics going on in this book of objective morality. Sound observation.
Perfect.
Accurate.
All right.
Okay. We're still in verse 1. So
What
So,
what
and-
were you gonna say?
I think he said, "Are we going to move on?"
We need the.
I was going to say, are we going to move on to chapter 3?
Yeah.
But you just said we're still in verse 1. That's
Yes.
not what I expected you to say.
Yeah. So, and I'm still in that verse. So, and stayed there. I'm using the NIV version. The Hebrew Bible reads, "And they lied there." The word for lied, vayishkevu, can denote sexual intercourse, as seen in Genesis 19:33 and 35, and preparation for sleep in 2 Kings 4:11. This possible innuendo is omitted from most early translations.
I love the idea that they fucked there.
Yeah, I mean, this chapter has a lot of sexual innuendos, and I'll mention it here. So, on verse 2, tonight, this is omitted from the Septuagint, but is found in verse 3 there. Nelson writes that Masoretic
I
text
have to go for
moved the
5
word.
minutes.
Okay. Nelson writes that Masoretic text moved the word to verse 2 to emphasize the secrecy motif and to reduce sexual implications. Ahituv writes that they couldn't have entered by night, based on what Rahab says in verse 5. He writes that tonight might refer to the hour before darkness breaks, as seen in Ruth 3:2, quote, "He will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor tonight," end quote. But winnowing is not done by night and refers to the west wind flowing at evening. On verse 3, "came to you and entered your house." The Septuagint reads, "came to your house." And Peshitta reads, "came to you." Zakovitch writes that the apparent doublet can be understood if one reads "came to you" in Hebrew "haba'im elaich" as a euphemism that the spies came to have sex with her, since the word bo is used for sexual imagery in Genesis 16:12, 33, and 38:8. This is also understood as such by Abravanel and Dozeman. Nelson prefers the Peshitta and writes that it preserves the more difficult, offensive, and morally ambiguous original. On
That's
verse,
in part why I believe that the Septuagint, the Greek version, couldn't have come before the Hebrew, because it always seems like it's the easier reading in the Greek, which kind of goes opposite to what's usually preferred. Are the harder readings are generally the original readings, or the
I mean, it depends. It depends on what section we're talking about. So it's debated amongst scholars.
I love
Uh,
that the only thing you can rely on with the Bible is inconsistency and errors.
Mhm.
On verse 4, "but the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them." Hebrew Bible reads, "and the woman took the 2 men and hid them," as seen in early translations and KJV. It is not clear when Rahab hid the spies. Did she hide them before or after the men of the king came? Kimchi writes that she already hid them before the men came to her house, when she felt that the matter was known to the king. Zakovitch, however, writes that it is difficult to assume that Rahab sensed that the king knew. Perhaps Rahab was the one who informed him, so that they'll chase the spies, and when they'll be thankful to her for their escape, and she will get her reward. Zakovitch writes that the narrator only informs on the arrival of the king's men, and then the hiding of the spies to create suspension.
You also kind of have to wonder, what the hell were the spies even doing there? Like, yeah, they were told to go look at the land, so they went into this place in the wall, right, the wall of the city, and then immediately they have been, I guess, scared out of there. However you want to phrase it.
So let me.
What are they
this-
even
this is how I
doing?
understand you.
These are horrible spies. I would fire these men on the spot.
So they're
They
supposed to go
they've
get
got the
military
news.
reconnaissance,
Wait.
right?
They're supposed to what?
They're supposed to go get military reconnaissance, right? They're supposed to
Yes.
evaluate what the. So they go into a brothel straight away. That's the only thing they do, and that's it. And they leave.
In fairness to them, because your point is entirely valid, but Rahab's house was supposedly built into the wall with an outside window, which could have a little bit of value for reconnaissance, but also, yeah, clearly. And I have to wonder if she was willing to throw over her whole town for them. They must have been really good in bed.
Must have been, yeah.
I mean, that is some good dick. I have never encountered the type that would make me turn on my entire city. that is not. That is out of this world.
Yeah, I
The,
should
the
note
whole
now.
morality of God gave them the land, which means that he didn't give them the land. He just they're using God as an excuse to go kill everybody. So God didn't give shit. And so this person is just, oh well, you are fueled by this powerful God or whatever. So just kill everybody except my family. Deeply moral.
Well, and if you
Family
have
right.
no other alternative, of course you're going to choose to save your family if you can save no one else. But she's the one that's
But
helping them out of
there's no-
town.
if you could save no one else,
Yeah,
turn over the fucking spies.
yeah, exactly.
you have to
Let them have
consider
the
that
reconnaissance. You know that their army is now down by 2 or however many there were. I think it was 2, wasn't it? So, yeah, save your people, align with them. Hey, you came in here to kill everybody. That makes you a murderer or a wannabe murderer. That makes you a dangerous criminal. You should be dispensed with.
I should note Nelson, who writes, on the other hand, a case can be made that they have picked a perfect place for their undercover work. Mesopotamian parallels suggest that.
Yes, going into a brothel is great
Listen,
for undercover
RN.
work.
Listen, RN. So, Mesopotamian parallels suggest that Rahab could be thought of as operating an inn at the city gate, where she could keep track of comings and goings, perhaps with an obligation to report suspicious strangers. In any case, strangers would not be conspicuous at Rahab's house and could pick up the latest news there. In the end, her occupation will turn out to be essential to their survival.
Okay, so I got a couple more comments. Dara O'Kane says, "Do you think that Baal, however you say it, I say Baal. I've just always said it that way.
Baal.
I've heard it as Baal, which doesn't make any sense to me. And the other pagan gods exist as characters in the Bible, like Yahweh, or is he the only God? Muslims believe the pagan gods are jinn that wanted to be worshipped."
Depends on which text you read.
Yeah. Theology evolves. Everything evolves. Theology evolves. There was a time when the other gods were just part of the pantheon and you worshipped Yahweh for war and Baal for rain. And then there was a time when you were only allowed to worship Yahweh and the others were still gods, but it was none of their business and they needed to get the fuck out. And then there was the time when they were just all impertinent spirits who were getting uppity and had nothing to do with it. And then they were just all made up.
Okay. Satan 616 says, isn't the situation where a person with sinful lifestyle redeems themselves a common motif? Also, if Joshua represents Jesus, does Rahab represent Mary Magdalene by that logic?
Yes.
Well, probably not, because it's these other guys fucking her, right? But
Yeah.
the whole
That's
thing,
nice,
all the stuff about Jesus isn't exactly like a 1-to-1, right? It's more like, here are what some very famous biblical characters have done. So he's going to do and kind of emulate some of those things, like those great qualities that they had. And in this case with Joshua, it would be, someone who is, the leader of the conquest.
Yeah. And in fairness, Mary Magdalene was never a prostitute. That was written in later by Christian fathers who didn't like that a woman had a position of power in the early church and influence and respect, because fuck that bitch. So she was then retroactively made into a hooker, because if there's one thing you can count on men to do, it's degrade and dehumanize a woman who does anything successfully.
On the pronunciation of
Like the opposite.
Baal, the way that I say it, there's a comment in the chat that let me see if I can find it again. I just accidentally clicked it. Okay, so Mr. Crennan says in principle Paleo-Hebrew El is God, but Ba is son. So and Baal is God's son, but Baal came to be defined as Lord.
Yeah, Baal was the
Well,
son of the high
Ba
god
isn't.
El.
No, Ba
One of
is
them.
Yeah,
not.
but Ba doesn't mean son.
No,
Okay.
Ben is
I don't.
son.
I don't think so. Yeah, it's just and Al
Yeah,
doesn't mean
Baal.
L as well.
Well, what do you know
It doesn't
about
mean
He's-
God.
Paleo-Hebrew?
Yeah, he's talking about Paleo Hebrew, but I'm not sure about.
It's just,
Yeah, but
it's just
Paleo-Hebrew
as
is a
far from
script,
Hebrew as
not as
Reformed
language.
Egyptian is from Egyptian.
Paleo-Hebrew is a script, really. It's not the name of a language, as far as I'm aware. It's more the writing system. It looks like Phoenician. Yeah, Baal isn't son of Lord, son of God. It's a word in itself that means like Lord. It literally means like Lord, my master, my husband.
Okay.
I mean, Apollo was also the son of Zeus, so they're not mutually exclusive.
But kind
But
of like
what-
the Greek kurios as well. Possible.
Yeah, someone wrote it's a Proto-Semitic root. It's its own thing.
Fair enough.
All right, and then SJL says if God wanted to give them a promised land without genocide, apparently Madagascar was unoccupied at the time.
Hey,
I mean,
Transport would have impressed me.
I also would have been impressed, but let's face it, if we've learned anything from reading the Pentateuch, it's that genocide is one of God's favorite things.
Yeah, but I love that example. I mean, here you want a promised land? We got tons of land all over the place, all over the world that there's nobody at. We'll give you this pristine tropical paradise. There you go. Isn't this
I
lovely? No.
mean, I will say that it kind of reminds me of the Madagascar plans. So no.
It would be impressive because it would have all
whoever
these
knows.
amazing animals as well that you can find nowhere except for Madagascar. That would be
And God can do anything, right? So God can take this entire, this entire tribe and just whoop, and there they are in Madagascar. They just all disappeared here, reappeared here. Beam me up, Scotty. Hey, look, we've got a promised land. Didn't have to kill nobody.
Except the Lemurs. They would have killed the Lemurs.
Okay, so on that same verse, in verse 4, yes, the men came to me. The sexual innuendo remains with the use of the word bo. Eliyahu Assis, in the name of Butler, writes, Ahab rejects any suspicion that she has cooperated with the spies, suggesting rather that they came, like most of her visitors, for sexual satisfaction, and when their desires were met, they left. If she had not lied, but rather claimed that there had been no sexual intercourse, and that the spies had come to lodge at the inn, she could not have claimed that they had already left. The apparent sexual intentions of the spies constitute a good alibi for Ahab's claim that she did not know where they came from. On that same verse, I did not know where they had come from. Septuagint omits this clause. Zakovitch writes that perhaps this was omitted because Ahab answered a question which wasn't asked. Nelson prefers the Masoretic text and writes that it is an important part of Ahab's defense. On verse 6, this verse repeats what is told in verse 4 and informs how she concealed them. Nelson writes that the delay in revealing how she has hidden them creates narrative tension during her long replay. He writes, with this delayed exposition, the narrator has saved the negative aspects of the spy's situation until verse 6, revealing to the anxious reader that the uncomfortable facts of just where and how she has hidden them. They are passive and helpless, submerged under a mound of flax. Their assignment had been to dig up, verses 2 and 3, chafar. Instead, they are buried, in Hebrew, taman. Probably there is some humor intended in their situation. Two men from a military expedition find themselves deeply enmeshed in the domestic textile domain of womanhood. Nor is her roof a particularly good hiding place, if one considers what happens to Bathsheba and David's wives, seen in 2 Samuel 11:2 and 16:22. Ahab has hidden the spies in a place of dubious safety and undignified discomfort. Yeah, I mean, reading the text
Love
of
it.
this, it's a bit sophisticated in my opinion. like, with all the sexual innuendos and all the like, uh, some some
Come on, what is
Hitler
a
or
spy
Arnie,
story without sexual innuendo, though? I mean, really. You're muted, Aaron.
Yeah, it's not even a spy story. That's the purpose of being a spy, is so that you can have the sex story.
Avant
That's-
girl.
yeah.
And apparently
Exactly.
she was really hot. Like,
Yeah, have you guys not seen any of the James Bond movies?
yeah, I know. And what did it say? Girl was thick. I mean, that's the word used to describe her. Girl was thick, and thick thighs save lives. So
Wide open or something vast. Name.
she had that badonk.
On verse 7, Nelson comments, verse 7 makes the situation even more desperate. The king's patrols now block their way back to Joshua, and of more immediate concern, the gate has been shut. Ahab has both saved them and trapped them to their ultimate advantage. Their supposed deliverance by Ahab has left them vulnerable and helpless. They are not like Samson, who when caught in a similar trap could simply pull up the city gates and walk away. Judges 16 verses 1 to 3. Thus, the reader discovers that the narrative problem set forth in verse 2 has by no means been resolved. As far as the plot is concerned, these spies have hit bottom and are ready for a new stage. Negotiations with the woman who has both saved and entrapped them. On verse 8, the sexual innuendo continues. Before the spies lay down, in Hebrew yishkavun, with shachav meaning to lie down, she went up on top of them, alta alehem, on the roof. And I think I'm the only one who found this sexual innuendo. I didn't find any reference to this by scholars, and Keep even said a nice find to when I found out this like thing that apparently nobody found.
You're telling
Yeah.
me that Jewish scholars don't know about having a woman on top?
Not just Jewish, I mean scholars in general.
Christian scholars definitely wouldn't.
Yeah, they probably just read it as to them, Ale, rather than onto them.
Boo.
I mean, you think these guys fuck? No, they don't.
Well, not well.
I'm not gonna say it.
On verses 9 through 10, Butler comments, the prostitute gives them the late night news. The city is in a state of panic and terror, knowing the God of the Israelites has given his people the land. The people of Jericho have cause to fear because they know the story of Israel's deliverance from Egypt through the Reed Sea in Exodus 14 verses 15, and of the total defeat of Sihon and Og in Numbers 21. Hess writes, Rahab's confession Rahab confesses that what was foretold by the celebrants of the Exodus, in Exodus 15 verses 1 through 18, has come to pass. She confesses what she heard, though the source of the message is not given. Rahab comes the first prophetic figure in the historical books, as well as the first inhabitant of the land to join Israel and Israel's God. On verse 11, well, I think
No, I'm just going to go get more coffee. Sorry.
Okay. On verse 11, everyone's courage failed. The Hebrew Bible reads, no spirit of any man arose anymore. Rashi comments, the men had no spirit, i.e. desire, even to lie with a woman. It was said by the rabbis in Talmud Zevachim 116b, there was no prince or ruler who had not had sexual relationships with Rahab, the harlot. She was 10 years old when the Israelites went out of Egypt, and she engaged in harlotry for 40 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow. God really had kept tabs on this woman.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
There's a story about I don't know if it's in Jeremiah. It says like, oh, he was in a pit and he was being rescued and he was pulled out of the pit by a rope and it was uncomfortable. So he said, oh, if only they would give me a ladder. And God tells him, well, your ancestor Rahab, she just let them down with a rope. So you're gonna get a rope as well.
And also,
So she engaged in prostitution for 40 years.
Yeah.
Yeah, apparently
According
she was
to
50 at the
Chazal.
time.
Yeah.
What? She was what?
She was 50 at the time of the story.
She was,
Apparently.
and then continued for 40 years?
No,
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 no.
no.
No, she started when she was 10. Apparently.
Wait. That doesn't make sense either.
Well,
Because,
in the Bible, it does.
I mean, come on, Tomer, you're a mathematician.
Yeah.
They,
10 if she
they
started
stopped
at
at the
age-
house of a 10-year-old prostitute?
No,
10?
no, all right. No. The Exodus happened when she was 10, all right? After 40 years, they went into her inn, and she
Okay,
was
so-
50.
Okay, so she had already done the 40 years
Yes.
stint as a prostitute.
Yes.
Before, okay.
Yes.
The whole point is that that this story is marks her.
So she was 50 when they met her. She had already done 40 years as a prostitute. Tomer, mathematician. When did she start being a whore?
10.
Biblical morality, people.
Also,
Morality
to
comes
the
from
very
God,
topic
Ar.
that
Yeah,
she
the-
gets
the-
married
that's
to
not
and
fair,
has
no.
sons.
It's not biblical, it's Chazalic, so yeah, not really.
Even worse.
Yeah. Kind of, yeah.
What I was going to say is what may be implied here, since the spies went out to get, like, military intelligence, and they obviously got it at this place. That means that she must have known all the secrets, because maybe she was in bed with all the military leaders
Yeah.
all these years. So of course
Yeah.
they're all.
That was the
She's in
idea.
the know.
Spies? Were there 2 spies or were there 3? I forget.
2.
There were 2.
Employing a very good prostitute as a spy, if you can trust her, is an excellent strategy, because women, at that higher level who interact with men, legal and military and spiritual leaders, and get them very relaxed and drunk, they know shit that nobody else knows.
I get the feeling that this may have been done historically a time or two.
Oh yeah.
So, someone commented in the chat earlier that the spies were sent to find the lay of the land. Apparently, she started at 10 years old.
She was the lay of the land.
Yes.
Yeah. And by the way, the idea is that the 40 years was that she was 40 years in sin. She was a bad person, and then at 50 she proselytizes herself and become. I don't know if that
Okay.
that's the
Okay.
idea.
Yeah. So on that same verse, God in heaven above and on the earth below. Dozeman comments, Rachab's confession that Yahweh is God in heaven above and on the earth below is an inner biblical quotation of Deuteronomy 4:39, where the same confession appears in the speech of Moses to the Israelites. A.D.H. Mays notes that the confession in Deuteronomy 4:39 represents late tradition in the book, in which the affirmation of the unique power of Yahweh is similar to that in Deutero-Isaiah. For example, Isaiah 43:10, 44:6, 45 verses 6 and 22. Thomas Romer locates the change from the monolatry that dominates Deuteronomy, for example, 6:15, 8:19, and 11:28, to the monotheism of Deuteronomy 4 in the post-exilic period, during the time of Persian rule. This is also the social milieu for the composition of Rachab's confession, which suggests that the exploration of the universal power of Yahweh in Deuteronomy, Isaiah, and Joshua occurs during the period of Persian rule. But Deuteronomy 4:39 and Joshua 2:11 represent different points of view on this theme. Deuteronomy 4:32-40 is exclusive in focus. It is intended to affirm the universal power of Yahweh to underscore the uniqueness of Israel's election. Joshua 2:11 moves in the other direction. It is a confession by the Canaanite Rachab that probes the religious inclusivity of Yahweh's universal rule within the literary setting of a book that is extreme in its exclusive ideology.
I mean, I'm fine with putting this this section as post-exilic. It seems to make the most sense there.
And I should also note Chrysostom, who writes, "Do you see how with faith she takes on her lips the word of the lawgiver? Quote, and I realize that your God is up in heaven and down on the earth, and that apart from him there is no God." End quote. Rachav is a prefigurement of the church, which was at one time mixed up in the prostitution of the demons, and which now accepts the spies of Christ. Not the
Wait,
one sent
wait.
by Joshua.
We can get demon prostitutes?
listen.
They
Not the
don't charge
one.
money.
I mean, I've never been interested in going into a brothel, but suddenly I'm curious. Demon prostitutes?
I'll read this again.
That's what I had.
I'll read this again. Rachav is the prefigurement of the church, which was at one time mixed up in the prostitution of the demons, and which now accepts the spies of Christ. Not the one sent by Joshua the son of Nun, but the apostles who were sent by Jesus, the true Savior. I learned, she says, that your God is up in heaven and down on the earth, and that apart from him there is no God. The Jews received these things and did not safeguard them. The church heard these things and preserved them. Therefore, Achab, the prefigurement of the church, is worthy of all praise.
That reminds me of God, was it the Shepherd of Hermas, where in the Shepherd of Hermas, the church is envisioned as an elderly woman,
Ecclesiastes.
and then she goes and she talks to Hermas, and then eventually there's this angel that comes in, like, explains all these visions or whatever, but she appears, and I mean, eventually they start building the actual church, but the personification of the church in the early chapters is as an old woman in the Shepherd of Hermas.
Yeah, I'm not sure they're like
And I
statues.
think
and
one of
stuff.
the images for the church early on, or maybe this is more in reference to the Jewish people in the book of Revelation, I think the concept of the church, according to whoever wrote that, is that the how, like, they talk about, they use the allegory of marriage for Christ, and the church is his bride. But I think what's behind this bride is that she was once a prostitute that is restored, and then she's married to Christ,
Ah.
which perhaps kind of
Because
pulls.
Israel was the first bride of Christ, or bride of God, with the covenant, not Christ, but with the covenant. And then that's why every time they worship anybody else, they're accused of adultery.
Whoring after other gods.
Yeah, whoring after other gods. Sex and worship are really thematically intertwined, especially considering how much religion forbids so much sex. But it's interesting. Yeah, but it's weird. There's this thing in Christianity, which I was never comfortable with, even as a believer, where you feel like you can claim the promises given to someone else by God. We are the new covenant, so we can claim all the benefits of Judaism and all the benefits of the oaths that God made to Israel, because we are the new Israel. We can claim this, we can claim that. There was a thing, it was like a fad maybe 15 years ago, the Jabez prayer. There's this one prayer recorded by this guy Jabez, and it says almost nothing else about him. There's like a 3 to 5 paragraph thing, and then people would pray the Jabez prayer to claim the blessing. And it was that whole philosophical position of just, if God says it to anyone, then I can claim it for me if I do the right magic, is just creepy. But it's very, very common in Christian theology and history.
Trevor Wright says, is the Joshua narrative a depiction of an evil character that has no understanding of truth and isn't a genuine reflection of character growth and development?
Well, he's not meant to be evil in the story, at least from the perspective of the people writing it.
I mean,
but he is an ass.
He ends up being evil, but it's there's so much evil depicted as good in the Bible.
Yeah, and I think there's a bit of like excusing him a little bit, in the sense that the authors frame him as the assistant of Moses. So implying that everything he's doing, he learned it from Moses. So he's just following orders.
Yeah, we had to figure out how we get the authority from one character deposited onto the next one. And if it can't be a direct descendancy, which everybody was used to at the time, then how else do you do it? You have to have, it has to be passed down some way divinely, taught to by the master, whatever. That's the best way to go. So Joshua existed, right?
I don't think so.
No, not even a little bit.
No.
Because I was criticized. I was called out as a liar by somebody. Made a video about me about what a liar I am because I didn't know that the Pentateuch, all 5 books, were written by Moses.
Yeah, listen.
Everybody knows that, and I'm a liar for saying otherwise.
No, that is these old ideas. I mean, yeah, of course, they're still held by like very conservative people. Not even conservative scholars. Conservative scholars don't even accept that really anymore, because they're scholars. They can read. They do accept like they accept like a little later dating for these things. And they place some of this stuff during like the early like around the time of David, right? Like maybe a little after David. That's when in their view these things would have been written until you get this
We're establishing a kingdom. We're going to write our shit down,
right? Yeah, and then eventually you get to like the to the exile and the writing of Deuteronomy, right? So that's like classic JDP stuff, but no, that is just not a tenable position anymore.
Yeah, even as a child, I noticed that there seemed to have been there seems to go like there's the older bits with Moses, Joshua, blah blah blah, and then it's somehow like kind of goes into a point like the Judges period, where things are kind of like in the air, and then it starts coming a bit more solid on the time of like Samuel thing, and it's almost like it's like myth became legend and legend became.
Yes, that was a very highly popular idea in like the 80s, 70s, like around there. That there was this period of myth making where you took like these local legends and you compiled them into myths until this was one greater myth. But then, of course, closer to the this is in their idea, right, in their model, closer to like the compiler's time period, you actually have like histories, like actual histories being written too. So you have to like kind of meld it all together, and that's essentially how we get this like from very mythological to like actually historical, because by the time we get through Second Kings, there will be a whole bunch of people that we do have evidence for, and we have evidence for some of the things that they did as well, like hard archaeological evidence. We can hold these things in our hands a lot of the times. So
we get real historical figures at that point.
Right, yeah.
And I think in defense, that's a process that often happens naturally. What you're discussing, Lawrence.
Absolutely.
Where you mythologize.
And you've heard of verisimilitude, right? Where they can a mythological work can contain, quote unquote historical things and name actual places and people, but it's done on purpose. And
right.
You should not assume something is. There you go.
My favorite example is the 3rd installment in the Indiana Jones trilogy, where he goes to Germany and accidentally bumps into Adolf Hitler. Well, we know Germany existed, and we know that there's we know Germany exists, and that there was an Adolf Hitler. So therefore, Indiana Jones is real.
Right. Yeah. Like, so you can't make that huge kind of assumption, right? Because myths do contain some grains of truth. It's just the thing is, you kind of have to throw the bullshit out of the way, kind of dig through.
There is
so Superman lived in Metropolis. There is no Metropolis. Batman lived in Gotham City. So DC comics are fake, but Spider-Man lives in New York. So the Marvel comics are real.
We live in the MCU.
I could have told you that. I saw Spider-Man the other day.
Okay, we should read a comment, because there's one that came up that
What we need is Isaac going to King's Cross Station and taking a picture in front of platform 9 3/4 because it's there.
True.
I
Yep.
can
True.
send you a picture of the Hogwarts Express. I've got it on my phone that I took.
See?
All right, so M. Doug offers 10 pounds and says, does anyone else suspect the slaughter of Jericho is a bit of a fisherman's tale? There is no evidence of major urbanization at the supposed time. The city was this big.
Yeah, the urbanization in that part of the land. So in in Judah, land of Judah, right? There was no urbanization there until later, and that's usually thought of now it's thought of by scholars to have okay, so you have earlier urbanization in Israel, so in the northern region, but then with the Assyrian invasion, everyone kind of moves down to Judah, and you have these huge building campaigns actually happening in Judah, so it becomes central. But yeah, this didn't happen.
Taking in refugees from war builds your economy and encourages your. Okay. Yeah.
Almost like that. Yeah.
Okay, I'll continue on verses 12 to 14. Dozeman comments, the change in theme from Rahav's confession to her request for an oath from the spies in verses 12 to 14 is signaled by the Hebrew ata, which means now, in verse 12. The oath between Rahab and the spies is based on kindness, chesed, translated in the NRSV as steadfast love. Rahab uses the motif to describe her spontaneous act of mercy toward the spies. Quote, I performed kindness, chesed, to you, end quote. She repeats the motif to describe the content of the oath that she seeks from the spies. The request for an oath with the nif'al form of shava is a judicial expression indicating that the trickster story of Rahab evolves into a legal narrative about the redemption of the clan of Rahab from the law of Cherem. The story is problematic because Yahweh requires the extermination of all indigenous people of the promised land without exception. No criteria for exemption from the ban exist in the Pentateuch. The story of the Rahab and her exemption from the absolute requirement of the ban represents a qualification of the teaching of Torah and make her story a legal precedent. On verse 13 in sisters in the NIV, in the Masoretic text, the Kirei reads my sisters, but the Ketiv reads my sister in the singular. Most other translations read my sisters. Dozeman writes that the reference to one sister may be a corruption. Septuagint does not refer to sisters, but reads, and all my house and all that belongs to me. On verse 15, she let them down by a rope through the window. Several commentators note that this is similar to what Michal did to David, seen in 1 Samuel 19:12. Only in that story, it doesn't say that she used a rope. Septuagint omits the rope, which, according to Zakovitch, is to liken the two stories. He writes that the lowering by rope has inspired the New Testament, seen in Acts 9, verses 23 to 25, and 2 Corinthians 11:3. Dozeman notes H.N. Russell's opinion about the function of the window. Quote, here the author makes use of an erotic motif well known in the biblical and extra-biblical literature. A woman grants a man, this case two men, exceptional access or exit. Underlying this is the risque relationship between them. The woman may be a virgin or a princess. Here, however, she is a prostitute. And I think Lawrence wanted to say something about this.
No, I was just checking. I was checking the Greek there, but I was also when you were talking about the rope. I think you cited Acts, right? I was the one that I was thinking was it was this really funny scene in I forget which gospel it was, but where this everyone's surrounding Jesus in his house. And everyone wants to get healed, so there's this mob around him, right? But then this one guy comes in down this rope through the roof.
Oh, the paralytic was lowered by his friends. I think that's in Luke. That's
Was
in
that
Luke.
Luke? Okay,
I
that
think
was,
that's in
oh my
Luke.
god. Either way, like that seemed like straight out of a cartoon. That scene.
Oh, 100%. 100%. It was ridiculous. Might have actually been one of those that was in both Luke and Matthew. I can't recall exactly.
Yeah,
But
I don't remember which one, but it was
yeah,
really funny. And that's
the
what I thought
reference,
of.
yeah, the reference in the New Testament is a little more in line with this story where you have a case of escape. At least once, possibly twice, Paul is said to have been rescued by being lowered out a window because, when he went to Damascus with the warrant for the Christians, that was totally legit because they totally would have had authority to do that. And it's not just a narrative excuse to make up the story. And then he became a Christian because he got zapped in the eyes and made blind and magically healed. Damascene Road and all that. Then he
Although we do have
pissed off.
two different
There's
accounts for why
yeah,
he
there's two different accounts, but I'm going with the more popular one. But then he pissed off everyone so much by being such an overbearing asshole about Christianity, except on the pro-Christianity side, that the entire city was shut down and they were going to hunt him out, and so he was lowered via a basket from some friend's house on the wall. They just, packed him in a giant bread basket and lowered it out the window. So glad he was short. That made it a lot easier, I'm sure.
There was a really funny description of Paul in the Acts of Paul and Thecla. He's described as like fat, stubby, bald. Like he's just like not a very good looking man. And it was quite funny.
I believe it too. He
Yeah.
talks like an insecure little bitch.
Yeah, he does. Absolutely. What a dick.
Oh,
Yeah.
fat, short, and bald, like and insecure as fuck.
Tomer, where are we on your commentary?
16. So, yeah, I mean,
So it's looking
Uh,
at 2.5 hours for 42 verses collectively.
yeah. So on 16, 3 days. How could she have known that they'll be back after 3 days? Rashi, based on Sifrei Deuteronomy 22, writes that she must have had divine inspiration to know they would return after 3 days.
Didn't she
Kimchi-
tell them to?
Listen,
Okay.
Well, yeah, she just said that to chase after them. She didn't say like come back after 3 days.
Okay.
Yeah. Kimchi writes that she reasoned that it was 3 days' journey from Jericho to Jordan. They would spend a day searching for the spies and then return to Jericho, making a total of 3 days. And there is a comment by Jerome who writes, she counsels them and says, wait here for 3 days. Not 1 day does she specify, not 2 days, but definitely 3 days. Notice what she says. Wait 3 days. She does not designate 3 nights, but 3 days. For hers was
Hallelujah.
an enlightened heart. Then she says, and after 3 days, but what does she say? Do not go through the open plains. She warns, but go up the mountain way. The faith of the church is not laid in the valleys, but is established on the mountains. Later, indeed, Jericho is overthrown, but this harlot alone is preserved untouched. Hence, the Lord says, I will be mindful of Rahab. That is, on the day of judgment, I will be mindful of her who welcomes my messengers.
I'm getting the
3
impression that Tomer is sneering at his own commentary.
It's Jerome.
Only the
What do you
kids.
expect?
Yeah.
3 shall be the number of the counting, and the number of the counting shall be 3. 4 shall thou not count, neither count to 2, excepting that thou thence proceedest to 3. 5 is right.
Right out.
Yeah. It gets better. It gets better.
Okay.
So,
And by that, he means worse. Okay.
yeah. On verse 18, you have tied this scarlet cord. Nelson comments, although this crimson thread sounds as though they are providing her with it, maybe as a gift of a bit of feminine finery, this seems awkward from the standpoint of staging. Perhaps the reader is meant to suppose that Rahab has just lowered them by her, perhaps very feminine and sexy, crimson thread, presumably intended as a touch of humor. This understanding could explain the Masoretic text's strengthening gloss cord of. Another possibility is that a red thread was already hanging out her window as a covenantal sign for a house of prostitution.
Well, that wouldn't make a
Yeah.
very good sign, would it? Okay. We're gonna go into the city. All the red thread buildings don't hurt.
And finally, and finally, on verse 21, she
Maybe
tied
that's
the
what she meant by her sisters.
Oh, come on.
Her
On
girls.
And finally, on verse 21, she tied the scarlet cord in the window. Abravanel writes that this doesn't make sense. Why would she tie the scarlet cord immediately if she was supposed to do so when they invade the land? He explains that if she did tie it during the invasion, the city people would suspect her and kill her. Kimchi and Ahituv write that this clause means that she followed their command but did so in the future, when they conquered the city. Septuagint omits this phrase. Butler writes that this is a case of homoeoteliuton or haplography. Nelson writes that the loss may have been bolstered by a feeling that Rahab's action would be premature at this point. Ambrose, Jerome, and Origen took the scarlet cord as reference to the blood of Christ, with Origen adding that the window anticipates the incarnation.
Oh, that's
But of
disgusting.
course.
Wow.
I hate
Yeah.
that.
But of course.
Yeah.
Oh, I have never seen a yogi contort himself into the position that mental gymnastics that Christian apologists. I never in my life.
I mean, the explanation of tying it now so that if you tied it during the actual invasion, people would notice it makes a lot of sense.
That does.
Maybe not
That
necessarily
does.
they're going to kill her for it, but maybe they'll copy her and then make it.
It would at the very least be suspicious. Whereas if she does it now, nothing bad is happening, so they don't need to be
Yeah,
suspicious.
Yeah, so a fun chapter.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, so
Okay.
if we try to do one more chapter,
yeah, it's 17 verses, so
Yeah.
I don't see
Okay.
a problem.
Lilith, would you?
Of course. I live to serve.
Wasn't creepy at all.
Okay.
I'm the only lady here. If I don't fuck with these guys, I mean, come on. What is the point you in? All right, Joshua, chapter 3, crossing the Jordan. Early the next morning, Joshua and all the Israelites set out from Shittim and went to the Jordan, where they camped before crossing over. After 3 days, the officers went through the camp, giving orders to the people. When you see the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord your God and the priests who are Levites carrying it, you are to move out from your positions and follow it. Then you will know which way to go, since you have never been this way before, but keep a distance of about 1,000 yards between you and the ark. Do not go near it. Don't get too close to the curtain. Joshua told the people, consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you. Joshua said to the priests, take up the Ark of the Covenant and pass on ahead of the people. So they took it up and went ahead of them. And the Lord said to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so that they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses. Tell the priests who carry the Ark of the Covenant, when you reach the edge of Jordan's waters, go and stand in the river. And Joshua said to the Israelites, come here and listen to the words of the Lord your God. This is how you will know that the living God is among you, and that he will certainly drive out before you the Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, Perizzites, Girgashites, Amorites, and Jebusites. See, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of all the earth will now go into the Jordan ahead of you. Now then, choose 12 men from the tribes of Israel, one from each tribe. And as soon as the priests who carry the ark of the Lord of all the earth, set foot in Jordan, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap. So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the ark of the covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage, all during harvest. Yet, as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing, and it piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam. in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the sea of Arabah, the salt sea, was completely cut off, so that the people crossed over opposite Jericho. The priests who carried the Ark of the Covenant stood firm on dry ground in the middle of the Jordan, while all Israel passed by until the whole nation had completed the crossing on dry ground. The word of the Lord.
So the water piled up.
Mm-hmm.
So you flooded this town.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, yeah, piled up like like I don't fucking know, like a picture, like
It
a
could be
hill of
within the
water.
river.
Rolling back, just a big swirly.
Yeah. A big
I don't know.
wall.
So it didn't just flood like when you put a dam up and it just floods everything. That's not how it piled up.
It went upwards.
Of course, because that's a thing that water does.
Remember in all the Moses movies where you have the magic giant walls of water that they walk between and it's all dramatic and shit?
Yeah.
That.
But only on one side because it's flowing. I mean, you know how flat earthers say that water finds its level, it knows how to find its level. So over here, God just told the water, like, the level's up there now.
Yeah. M. Doug says, wasn't it Jerome who lived in a cave and beat himself with a rock to drive out demons? Or am I thinking of another saint?
I have
Beat
no
him.
clue.
Beat himself with a rock.
Jerome.
Many
I
things.
thought they used floggers. That seems more efficient.
Yeah,
Jerome
we
is the
got
one who-
demons again. I thought we just sprayed for these things.
Well,
I hope
he
we put
wanted
plenty
a
of lube on that rock.
sex or an apple or something. So clearly that was a demon.
I would say that Jerome is the one who translated the Bible in the Vulgate,
Latin Vulgate, yeah.
attributed to it, I think.
Oh.
Okay, so I will say that Cyril of Jerusalem says that Joshua is recognized as a type of Christ in beginning his rule at the Jordan, appointing the 12 and collapsing the walls of Jericho.
Mm.
So yeah.
Oh yeah, pointing the 12 is also a bit random the way it's written. I'm sure you got commentary on that. It's like written twice.
maybe
Like the
I
first
can-
time just doesn't make any sense. It's just like, and you should point 12 tribes. And as soon as the water touches the feet, like, what?
Actually, I don't have
Oh,
commentary on
okay.
this. Okay,
That
so
that
That's weird.
actually carries over in the next chapter, what they do
Yeah.
designate the 12 men for.
Yeah, exactly.
To grab stones for a memorial. But at this point, this chapter just ends with they all walked across on dry land while a big giant magic pile of water sat upstream and no one was allowed to get close to the ark because don't look at how the magic is made.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so on verse 3, the Levitical priest. Several scholars note that this is a Deuteronomic phrase. According to Butler, strong textual support is found for dividing the priesthood into two branches, priests and Levitical servants. He writes that this represents a later understanding than that of Deuteronomy, and the book's influenced by it, wherein all the priests are Levites. The Septuagint reads, and our priests and the Levites. On verse 4, keep a distance of about 2,000 cubits between you and the ark. Do not go near it. Dozeman notes the awkwardness of the Hebrew. This command disrupts the instructions to follow the ark in verse 3 and the purpose for following it. He notes the opinion of Alberto Sogin, who proposed to reverse the order of verse 4, as does the NIV. Zakovitch writes that this clause is a priestly addition based on two reasons. One, if the Israelites were 2,000 cubits away, almost a kilometer from the ark, they wouldn't have seen it and therefore couldn't follow it. And two, in verse 17 forward, we see that the ark will stand still and the Israelites pass over it, and therefore there wouldn't be a great distance between it and them.
Yeah, like the
That's
area
fire.
needed for that to work very well is wild. Although like if you're talking about staying away from the ark, we have to remember the story of Uzzah, I think was his name. It had
Oh,
it touched
yeah,
the ark
yeah.
and it's like
Yes.
toppled over.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
He tried to help and God doesn't like that.
right, yeah. The importance of the ark to the priesthood is very exclusive here.
Yeah,
I think
and
it's Raduk. He says that it's not necessarily that the 2,000 amas is more of a limit, that they should be far away enough away from it so that everyone can see at the same time, but shouldn't go beyond 2,000 because then they would be too far to go to it if they were to stop on the Sabbath or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, having it be like almost 3,000 feet. That's quite a ways away.
Yeah,
it's
I should
yeah.
note Nelson, who writes, the disjunctive and emphatic syntax of verse 4a interrupts the connection between verse 3 and the rest of verse 4 and introduces an extraneous, probably priestly concern about the ark's perilous holiness. Such a 900 meters separation would make the envisioned crossing scene impossible. It was on the basis of this verse and Numbers 35:5 that the distance for a Sabbath day's walk was determined.
Isn't there also a thing about being between the staves of the ark? And there was a miracle that all of the people fit between the staves of the ark? Isn't
Sounds
that a
chazanic.
thing? Yeah.
That
Maybe.
I've never heard that, but that could be part of the Jewish
Yeah. I
extra
think Radak mentions it as an idea, but I can't remember.
because you had the balsa wood on both sides, and they carried on their shoulders, two sides like it was like a litter or something.
Yeah.
And so I mean, obviously the little extra, the priests who are Levites is definitely indicative of someone making a point. But yeah, I've never heard that about the between the state. That would be
Yeah, me
that would
neither.
be
I
weird.
need to look at this. And by
Did,
the way,
did
Radak is kimchi, just
Yeah.
so people know.
Let me
On verse
see.
5. So on
Yeah.
verse
Oh, I don't
5,
have English for it.
oh,
Okay.
yeah, there is no translation to kimchi or Gersonides, unfortunately, to
Yeah.
English. On
Yeah, I
verse
had
5.
the physical book with the art scroll.
Okay.
Art scroll
Okay.
Joshua that has like an English translation.
Okay.
But I think they've added to it as well. It doesn't seem to have a one-to-one translation.
Okay. On verse 5, Nelson comments, although this isolated call for sanctification is often cited as evidence that these chapters represent a sort of cultic script, holiness was also a requirement in the ideology of divine war, as seen in Deuteronomy 23:15, which is 14 in the Old Testament, 1 Samuel 21:5. Tomorrow points to the single night chronology of verse 1, but could also be part of a routine formula of sanctification, seen in 7:13 and Numbers 11:18. The expression among you associates verses 5 and 10. On verse 7, Butler comments, the divine word is closely related to chapter 1. God promises to validate the leadership of Joshua for the people and to validate the leadership of Joshua for the people and thus to fulfill his promise to Joshua in 1:5. The miracle at the Jordan becomes the basis of Joshua's claim for divine authority and divine presence. Joshua's claim to power does not rest on anything he has accomplished. It rests on what God has promised and accomplishes at the Jordan, and it rests on the obedience of Joshua to the words and example of Moses. Joshua thus inherits the Mosaic presence and Mosaic office through obedience to the divine word and the Mosaic word. Joshua is the true chosen leader after Moses and a true prophet.
I mean, it's an obvious parallel with Moses parting the waters.
And Origen writes that the Jordan crossing manifests Joshua's exaltation by the Lord through repenting the mystery of baptism, a dispensation that assures us of God's presence among us. Yeah. So, on verse 10, Canaanites, Hittites, Hivites, etc. Ahituv notes that in other places in the book, only 6 peoples are mentioned, with the Girgashites missing in 9:1, 11:3, and 12:8. He notes that Chazal in Leviticus Rabbah 17:6 wrote that the Girgashites left Canaan and thus didn't fight Joshua. In Genesis 16 verses 19 to 21, we find 10 peoples, including the Kenites, Kenizzites, Kadmonites, and Rephites. He further writes, the description of Canaan as the land of 7 peoples reflects the versatile composition of the land before it became the land of Israel, probably until its conquering by David, as is recalled in the Israelites' consciousness. But all the lists of the Canaanite nations, which are not identical in the number of nations and their composition, are artificial lists that include general names such as Canaanite, Amorite, and Hittite, next to specific names like the Hivites, Jebusites, Girgashites, and maybe Perizzites. It seems that these lists are mainly Deuteronomistic. A hint to their later writing is found in the uses of the names Hittites and Amorites in Neo-Assyrian and Neo-Babylonian inscriptions, which indicate that which indicate the area west of the Euphrates. Likewise, the mention of the Hivites hints probably to the 7th century BCE, since the name of the land, since the land, since the name of the land Hume is first mentioned in an inscription from the 10th year of the reign of Nabopolassar, reigned 610 BCE.
I think that while we have these lists of Canaan's inhabitants, we have them recur throughout. So like it's in also Joshua 9, 11, 12, and 24. And yeah, so it is characteristic Deuteronomy stuff here. Although I kind of want to point a similarity in the usage of this and the genealogical lists. So if let's say we had like these older genealogical lists that were later included into the text of like Genesis and Exodus, and were kind of seen as like tying parts of the story together. I feel like their usage, while different in some ways, is similar in others, in that these lists or this understanding of these groups here would have existed previously and then kind of later added, and maybe even perhaps during the same period, where tying the people to the land, it was very important, and kind of where they came from, sort of thing. So they might stem from the same kind of social milieu. That's just me going off the top of my head there.
Well, we see a lot of that in Genesis.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I think that if this section was from around the same time, at least actually being written down or compiled, depending on what view you want to take, then I don't really see that as I see these as similar in function, different in form.
Yeah, I mean, the later authorship, because that was not actually the name of many of the tribes, and Canaanites was just a general term.
Yeah,
definitely. But because this is Deuteronomistic, and at least Genesis was compiled later, and some of the elements would have been written in later. Some of the narratives about how specific tribes, the kind of insulting origins of Moab and Amorites as being, the products of incest and Lot's daughters and everything. It's sort of, you kind of wonder kind of which came first in terms of being written down in some cases, not in all cases. Some cases are clearly coming from older sources, but there's a lot of inventing mythical narratives to degrade the people you want to justify destroying later.
I also think that in some other sense, these genealogies they're essentially doing, and this would only make sense if these are works that come later rather than sooner. Because what they're going to do is they're going to point towards an ancestor that in many cases, or in every case perhaps, and I'm talking about like the main guys, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph, they would have had their own, these would have been like regional characters perhaps, that prior to the writing, prior to like Judaism being full blown, perhaps there was a Jacob somewhere of the certain region that already existed. There was somebody that the reader in this upon composition would be like, yeah, I've heard of these people. I've heard of Isaac.
Yeah,
And I think they may be using that in their
I could totally see that, because obviously a lot of this is, it's retconning and repurposing oral histories and myths. But honestly, you know what it reminds me of? Catholic saints. Nowadays it's different, but back in the day, like medieval times, the rules for making a saint was that they had to be like 400 years old, dead, well attested, and have 3 miracles, which ended up with a whole bunch of basically local mythological figures being made into saints. And sometimes it was actually like, I believe some Celtic goddesses may have been sort of retconned into saints or something like that.
They
Like, it was a
were,
bit,
yeah,
Oh,
they
yeah.
were.
yeah, it
Criticism,
was
yeah.
kind of a way to keep
Well, what's her name? Oh my god,
Beatrice Bernice. No,
no, not Bernice. Oh my god, I was just reading about this not that long ago because I was doing that project on
right.
on St. Patrick. Oh my god, what was the name? Why am I blanking on this? It's
Well, you
somewhere
think
in my
about
notes.
definitely with the Virgin Guadalupe and Diego, who's
Mm,
part of her origin story.
Yes.
Diego was he grew up in an Aztec home, so he was
mhm.
identified with an Aztec, a local legend, and then it becomes syncretized with this rebranding of him alongside with the Virgin Guadalupe.
It's interesting though. Like I could, obviously we have precedent for this folding in local legends, gods, heroes, and ideas into a unified of the new belief system with adaptation.
Bridget. It was Bridget. It was Saint Bridget.
Bridget, there we go.
Okay. But yeah,
Yes.
the thing about the hagiographies, I don't know about the 400-year thing because I know that Patrick's hagiographies were at least written about 300 years afterwards. But the
Yeah.
but like yeah, for Thecla too, her hagiographies were supposedly written also around 300 years afterwards, maybe 400-ish. It's really it's really fascinating how they take these cultural heroes and turn them into mythical ones. It's really cool stuff.
I
And so
think
some
we're
of them
very
may have been
cool.
real, some of them may have not been. It depends on who you're talking about. But yeah, it's
I think we're diverging a bit.
yeah, we have. You're right.
But the
Okay.
process is an established thing in religion where you can do this. So it's it happened before. It may very well be happening here and in other places in the text.
Okay, on verse 11, the Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of all the earth. Hebrew Bible reads, the Ark of the Covenant, Lord of all the earth. Butler writes that the designation Lord of all the earth reflects one of the many epithets appropriated by Israel from its Canaanite heritage and baptized into service to proclaim the greatness of Yahweh. The meaning of earth in Hebrew Eretz could denote either just Canaan or have a universal meaning as seen in Deuteronomistic thought, like Deuteronomy 10:14. Nelson notes that universal dominion is attested in Psalms 97:5, Micah 4:13, and Zechariah 4:14, 6:5. On verse 12, this verse breaks the continuity of the story. Although Rashi and Kimchi wrote that this refers to the preparation of the people, some scholars like Ahituv and Zakovitch wrote that a scribe accidentally copied 4:2 into verse 12. Nelson writes that this isolated command creates suspense and signals that there will be more to this story than the report of a miraculous crossing. On verse 13, its waters flowing downstream will be cut off and stand up in a heap. The word translated to downstream is Yodim. This is where the name for the Jordan River, Yarden, comes from. Septuagint omits the reference to the water piling up into one heap. Butler notes the Fritz's opinion that the waters going down from above is an explanatory gloss. Nelson prefers Septuagint's reading and writes that the Masoretic text supplements from verse 16, creating, quote, some puzzling grammar in the process, end quote. On verse 15, the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. Achituv and Zakovitch describe this as a parenthesis to describe the Jordan during spring. Septuagint adds of wheat harvest. Dozeman notes Tov and Sipila's opinion that the Septuagint has a midrash type explanation to explain the Hebrew day of the harvest. I should also note who was it? Origen, who writes that the divided waters of the Jordan symbolize two varieties of the baptized, those who remain steadfast in God's grace and those who return to sinful living. Now on
The
verse
Dead Sea.
16. Yeah. On verse 16, at a town called Adam. In the Masoretic text, the Ketiv reads at Adam, in Hebrew be Adam, but the Kirei reads from Adam, me Adam. While early translations read the Kirei, most scholars prefer the Ketiv. Septuagint reads Kiriath Ye'arim, located in the hill country of Judah, and appears in a list of tribal boundaries in 15, 9, and 60. And finally, on verse 17, nation, in Hebrew it's goy. And Dozeman writes, the Masoretic text describes the Israelites as a goy, nation, rather than people. The term goy is used frequently to refer to the Israelites in the divine promise of nationhood and land to the ancestors, as in Genesis 12:2, 17 verses 4 to 6, and 18:18, and occasionally in the story of the Exodus, in Exodus 19:6. But it is avoided. Sorry?
Sorry to interrupt. But yeah, I'm noticing on the Septuagint they do have Kariathim. Yeah.
So I was in, but it is avoided for the most part in Deuteronomy, where it tends to refer to non-Israelite nations, the word goy. The Israelites are described as a goy in Joshua 3:22, perhaps to signal the fulfillment of the divine promise of nationhood to the ancestors. The 6 remaining references in Joshua 23 reflect the usage of Deuteronomy, where goyim refers to foreign nations.
Yeah, I always thought goyim or goy were Gentiles, like, that I was a goy.
It's a later.
It's a later, like, and there's also a group of people called goyim in Joshua as well.
Oh, it looks like some Septuagint manuscripts also have so the location, Kariatharim, as they use a different word, and it's they use kathiairein, which I'm not sure what it means, but I know it's a verb. I know it's an infinitive. So it's interesting how some I don't know, that might just be like a textual mistake, right? It might just be like a misspelling, but it is interesting that's a variant.
Yeah, but by the way, the word gentle is just, it's like a direct translation. Gentilus means a people, a nation, or whatever.
A nation being all the other nations that are not God's nation.
Yeah, it's like a short version of like other nations, the nations of the world.
Right.
Yeah.
The everybody else.
Yeah. But the word is used for both. I mean, like as Thomas said, it's used quite a lot in Joshua to refer to the Israelites themselves as a goy as well.
Interesting. Very interesting.
And Tomer?
Yeah, I'm done.
Okay. So we're going to have to take a bit of a break from... shut up, dog. We're going to have to take a bit of a break from Bible lessons because 1 week from today, I will be at sea.
Couldn't we do it on Tuesday?
We sure can. I'd be happy to. And the week following, I'm doing a cruise of the Caribbean. I'm a featured speaker on the Free Thought Cruise. So I've never been on a cruise before, but somebody paid my way, and I'm like, I'm happy to experience it. But anyway, that means 2 Saturdays in a row that I will be on this boat, both leaving and coming back to Orlando. So not going to be able to do it this week, not be able to do it next week. We can do it on Tuesday, but the next Tuesday I'm out. Okay. And if we want to do a subsequent Tuesday to maybe catch up, that'd be great.
So just looking at my calendar here, that would mean that our next show would be on Tuesday, the 30th of January. And then you would be gone to sea through both the 3rd and the 10th. And then we would come back on the 13th, the Tuesday there. Yep. Would that be okay?
If we could do both of those Tuesdays, yeah, that... Otherwise, I'm going to be I'm in a compromised position because I work from home and I have to be productive. And so taking a week to be on a boat where I have like no internet access for a lot of that time, or even if I had internet access, I'm still on a cruise ship for a week. So how do I get anything done?
Well, here's the thing. If you have like some videos done already, you can just schedule them to be released during the week.
Yeah. if I was able to do that, but the last video that I did that was on taxonomy took me over a week to do. It took me over a week to make that one video. Just the
Damn your
editing,
throwness, Aaron.
just the editing of it took 3 or 4 days.
Yeah,
So
maybe like a couple of
intense.
maybe a couple of like short videos of like of you on the cruise or something.
I'm trying to work out what can I do in the next few days to have both for the end of this month and for the beginning of next month, because I am behind both ways the way I see it. So this taking a week out of the world is really going to hurt me. So I'm trying to figure out ways around that. Crazy
Well,
busy all
hopefully
the
we
damn
can
time.
help you by doing most of the legwork for this show on those Tuesdays. And yeah.
Well, I sincerely appreciate it, because I'm also not going to be able to do the reading Joseph Smith thing either of those weeks either. So even helping out that, I'm still down on the other thing, and then of course any other kind of any other kind of production that I try to do. But thank you. So we could do Tuesday the 30th, and we can do Tuesday February 13th.
That's what I have down.
Excellent.
Yep.
Excellent.
I just checked
for that.
I just checked my calendar. I had a show with Natalia Reagan, but that's just in between those dates, so that will work for me.
Brilliant. Thank you all so very much. All right, and
Also,
of course,
remember,
as always, join the Discord.
well, yeah, I was gonna say that eventually, join the Discord, but if you're gonna clip the first part of today's show with the Deuteromistic history stuff, yeah, I don't know, that takes up some content.
Yep, yeah, that I could do that too. I mean, is that what you're happy to do? Because you said you were going to make one.
Oh, I mean, listen, it's better if you do it, honestly. Like maybe
All
in
right.
the future, I can make a more comprehensive thing.
Yeah,
but
if you do it,
Okay. I'll be happy to share that, and then it won't stop you from making or improving one. Yeah.
Arn, if you do it, then Lawrence.
Peter?
If you do it, then Lawrence can just download it. Saves Lawrence a lot of work making the video. Just teasing.
All right, and happy to have everybody here. Mark, I'm glad that you're here regular now. It's good to see you. Anyway, I got to run because I've always got other stuff that I have to jump right into, and so I've been getting messages. Let me know when you're done. Yeah, okay. Take care of other stuff. Thank you very much. See you on Tuesday.
Yeah. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.